She was 8 months pregnant, barefoot in a blizzard, and her husband had just locked the door. Not metaphorically, not in some quiet, civilized way. Grant Mercer had looked Elena in the eye, wrapped his fingers around the brass handle, and pulled that door shut like she was a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. The deadbolt clicked. The porch light went dark. And Elena stood in 6 inches of fresh snow, wearing nothing but a cotton nightgown and the bruise his hand had left on her wrist 40 minutes earlier. If you found this story, stay until the end. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The snow had been falling since noon and showed no intention of stopping. By 7 o'clock, it had swallowed the Mercer driveway whole, erased the hedges, turned the iron gate at the end of the property into a rusted ghost barely visible through the white. Elena knew the neighborhood. She'd lived in it for 4 years. Walked its sidewalks, waved at neighbors who smiled the way people smile when they want nothing from you. But none of those neighbors had their porch lights on tonight. None of those houses offered a window with warm yellow light spilling out. The storm had pulled a curtain over the entire street. She made it to the sidewalk in 40 steps. She counted them because counting was the only thing that kept her from sitting down in the snow and not getting back up. The baby kicked, hard, right under her ribs, like a warning. "I know," Elena said. "I know, don't." She didn't know who she was talking to anymore. The baby, herself, or some version of the woman she used to be before Grant Mercer had dismantled her piece by piece over 4 quiet years. The woman who'd had opinions and a voice and a career she was proud of. That woman felt very far away right now. That woman had never stood barefoot in a January blizzard, holding a handbag against her chest like it was a life preserver. The bag. She hadn't even thought about why she'd grabbed it. Reflex. The thing her hands found in the dark when the rest of her brain was still trying to process what had just happened. She'd come downstairs at 7 because she'd smelled something burning. Grant's home office door had been open, unusual because that door was almost never open, and she'd heard him on the phone, his voice pitched low in that particular key he used when he was lying to someone important. She hadn't meant to stop, hadn't meant to listen, but she'd heard her father's name, and then she'd heard Grant say the words deposit box, and then she'd heard him say she doesn't know what she's holding, and Elena's feet had stopped moving entirely. She'd stood there in the hallway for 30 seconds that felt like a decade. Then Grant had turned around and found her there. He hadn't shouted. That was the thing about Grant Mercer that had taken Elena years to understand. He was most dangerous when he wasn't raising his voice. He'd looked at her with those pale gray eyes that had once made her feel chosen, special, seen. He'd crossed the room in 6 steps, taken the bag from her shoulder before she'd even registered his hand moving, rifled through it, found nothing worth finding, and then he'd handed it back, wrapped his other hand around her wrist at exactly the wrong angle, walked her to the front door, and put her outside. "You need air," he'd said, and locked the door. Elena stopped at the end of the block. The intersection was unrecognizable. No cabs, no cars, nothing moving except the snow. Her feet were already past pain, sliding into something quieter and more frightening. Numbness. She knew what that meant. She'd grown up in this city. She understood what happened to extremities that went numb and cold like this. She turned left because left felt like it led somewhere. She walked 2 more blocks with her head down and the bag clutched to her chest, the baby kicking a protest every 30 seconds with the precision of something that had decided to fight, even before it was born. She'd read every pregnancy book she could find, had spreadsheets, a birth plan, a hospital bag packed and waiting by the closet door in the room Grant had never let her fully make her own. She'd done everything right because doing everything right had seemed like protection. Like if she was perfect enough, careful enough, good enough, the world would hold still. The world had not held still. When Elena's knees buckled, she was in a parking lot. She knew this because she could see the faded yellow lines of parking spaces beneath the thin top layer of new snow. Old paint, old asphalt, a lot that hadn't been used in months. Whatever building it belonged to was dark and shuttered, its windows boarded. She grabbed a snow-covered parking barrier on her way down and managed to make it a controlled descent instead of a fall. Sat on the cold concrete with her back against the barrier and her hands flat against her stomach, feeling the baby move under her palms. "Okay," she said, and her voice came out strange, scraped, and thin. "Okay, we're going to be fine." She didn't believe it, but she said it again anyway, because the alternative was not something she was willing to name out loud. The cold had moved past her feet and was climbing her legs now. She could feel her own heartbeat slowing. That was wrong. She knew it was wrong. She needed to get up, needed to move, needed to find a door, a store, a stranger, anything with heat. But her legs had stopped listening, and her hands were shaking too badly to pull herself upright. And the snow kept falling in that pitiless, indifferent way of winter storms that don't know or care what they're burying. She was still conscious when the lights appeared. Not a single set of headlights. Multiple. A convoy. She counted 3, 4, 5 sets of high beams cutting through the dark before she lost the ability to count anything. Black SUVs moving in formation through the deserted intersection at the lot's edge. Unhurried, deliberate, not police, not ambulance, something else. The vehicles moved with the quiet authority of people who didn't need to announce themselves. Elena tried to raise an arm, couldn't get it above her shoulder. The lead vehicle stopped. She heard a door open, heard boots on snow, heavy, even steps, not running, not alarmed, just coming. She tried to turn her head toward the sound and managed it, and the last thing she saw clearly before her vision started collapsing at the edges was a man in a dark wool coat, no hat despite the cold, crouching down in front of her with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite calculation, and was something she didn't have a name for yet. "How far along?" he asked. His voice was low, unhurried. The voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that raising it was unnecessary. Elena's mouth shaped a word. 8. Maybe she said it out loud. Maybe she only thought it. The man looked at her for one more second. Then he looked back at his convoy, at the 2 men who had followed him across the lot and stood waiting. He said something to them she couldn't parse through the roaring in her ears. And then his arms were under her and the cold was still everywhere, but she wasn't falling anymore. The last thing Elena Mercer thought before the dark took her was that she hoped the baby had his hands, her father's hands. Strong, careful hands that knew how to hold on. Yet, Lucien Vescari had not intended to stop. The convoy had been returning from a meeting at the Halverson warehouse, a meeting that had resolved nothing and endangered everything, and Lucien's patience was already worn through to the backing. He had 3 calls to return, a situation developing in the port district that required his direct attention before midnight, and an operational security review scheduled for 9 o'clock that his lieutenant Marcus Fell had been circling like a dog around something it had smelled and didn't want to name directly. He was not a man who stopped for things that were not his business. He had seen the shape in the parking lot because he had trained himself over 22 years of survival to see shapes that didn't belong. The pattern recognition that had kept him alive through a federal investigation, 2 assassination attempts, and more betrayals than he'd bothered counting, had looked at that small collapsed figure against the parking barrier and registered wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The angle, the stillness, the presence of a single object clutched in both hands, even in unconsciousness. He'd said stop before he'd made a conscious decision to say it. His driver, a former military man named Osei, who had worked for Lucien for 6 years and knew better than to question an instruction twice, had stopped. The rest had followed the logic of what Lucien found when he crossed the lot. Now he stood in the entrance hall of the estate while his housekeeper, Margaret, directed a procured nurse named Doctor, Adara Solis up the east staircase and tried to explain to Marcus Fell, who had arrived at the estate 8 minutes ago and had not yet removed his coat, what had happened. Which was difficult because what had happened was not something Lucien himself entirely understood yet. "You brought her here," Marcus said. He wasn't accusing, he was confirming, the way Marcus confirmed everything, flatly and without color, before he figured out what he thought about it. She would have died in that parking lot. She might still. Marcus's eyes tracked toward the staircase. "She's 8 months pregnant, Lucien. She was exposed to those temperatures for... Dr. Solis will handle it. And when she wakes up, what do we tell her about where she is?" "The truth," Lucien said. "That someone found her." He moved past Marcus toward his study. "Have someone pull the security footage from that parking lot block. I want to know how she got there." Marcus fell into step behind him. Walked, from the look of her feet. Nobody walks barefoot in a January blizzard. Something put her outside. I want to know what. The study was a room Lucien had designed himself, but not for comfort, but for function. One long table, multiple screens, a secure line, no windows that couldn't be shuttered in under 30 seconds. The kind of room that said what it was without apologizing for it. He sat, pulled up the exterior camera feeds from the estate and the surrounding 3-block radius, watched snow fall on empty streets, waited. It took Marcus 40 minutes to come back with something. Her name is Elena Mercer, Marcus said, setting a thin file on the table. He preferred paper. Lucien had stopped trying to change it. 28, former paralegal. Stopped working about a year and a half ago. Married to Grant Mercer, age 41, investment portfolio manager with offices downtown. Lucien looked at the file without touching it. Address? 14 Renlow Drive, about 6 blocks from where you found her. 6 blocks in a blizzard, 8 months pregnant. Lucien did that calculation without expression. Any record? Her? Nothing. Clean as a page. Marcus paused. Mercer has some regulatory complaints. Nothing that stuck. His name appears in the periphery of 2 federal investigations from 4 years ago, both closed, both inconclusive. Another pause, the kind that meant Marcus was deciding how to phrase something. He's the kind of man who employs the right lawyers. So she walked out of her house in a blizzard. Or was walked out. Lucien looked up from the file. Marcus met his gaze. The bruise on her wrist, Marcus said. Adara flagged it. Fresh. Grip pattern. The study was quiet for a moment. The wind was up outside. Lucien could hear it moving against the shuttered windows, looking for a way in. Pull everything you can on Grant Mercer, Lucien said. Bank records if Nikolai can get them. Phone records. Property. Anything offshore. I want a picture of what that man actually does with his time. You think this is something? I think a man doesn't leave his 8 months pregnant wife in a snowstorm unless he has a reason he's more afraid of than he is of what anyone thinks of him. Lucien closed the file. Find the reason. Marcus took the file back and left. Lucien sat in the quiet and looked at the screens for a while, watching the snow settle over everything. He had not survived 22 years by ignoring the things that felt wrong. Elena woke up warm, which was the first surprise. The second was the ceiling, plaster, high, coffered in a way that belonged to a building with age and money behind it. The third was the weight of blankets, real wool blankets, stacked over her with the intention of warmth rather than comfort. And the fourth, arriving close behind the others, was the awareness of her stomach, the baby still there, still moving, the small flutter under her ribs that meant everything was still intact. She pressed both hands to her abdomen and lay still for 30 seconds, running the count. Movement. Regular. Good. She's awake! The voice came from across the room. A woman's, calm and professional. Elena turned her head. A woman in her mid-40s sat in a chair near the door, reading something on a tablet. Medical bag on the floor beside her. The room itself was large and sparsely furnished, the kind of spare that was a choice rather than a lack of funds. How are you feeling? The woman said, setting the tablet down and standing. Where am I? Somewhere safe. The woman came to the bedside. I'm Dr. Solis. You came in hypothermic and in early labor. We managed both. Your daughter is fine. Daughter. Elena had known. She'd declined the confirmation at the 20-week appointment because Grant had said it was unnecessary, and she'd stopped arguing about unnecessary things sometime around year 2. But she'd known. Whose house is this? Elena asked. Someone who found you, Dr. Solis said. He'll explain when you're ready to be upright. That's going to be tomorrow, not today. Right now, I need your blood pressure. Elena let the doctor take her blood pressure. Let her check the fetal monitor that she only now noticed was attached. Portable, expensive. The kind of equipment that didn't end up in a random bedroom without deliberate effort. Someone had gone to trouble for her. She didn't know how to categorize that. She hadn't been the recipient of trouble in a long time. Dr. Solis? Elena said. My husband. Does he know I'm here? The doctor paused with the blood pressure cuff in her hands. Just a half-second pause, barely visible. I don't know what communications have been made. That's not my area. Not a no, not a yes. A carefully constructed non-answer from a woman who had been told what to say and what not to say, which told Elena more than a direct answer would have. She lay back against the pillows and looked at the ceiling and thought about the phone call she'd overheard. Grant's voice, pitched low. She doesn't know what she's holding. What was she holding? Her bag sat on a chair near the window, the same worn leather tote she'd grabbed on instinct. She stared at it from across the room. She'd carried that bag for 3 years. Her father had given it to her. One of his rare gifts, because Richard Calloway had not been a man who expressed much through objects. He'd handed it to her the summer before she started law school with a kind of ceremony that had embarrassed her at the time. Just a bag, Dad. But he'd said, some things are worth keeping close. Richard Calloway had died 8 years ago. Ruled a suicide, case closed. Nobody appealed because there was nobody left to appeal except Elena, who had been 20 and had not known how to fight the machinery of an official conclusion. She hadn't thought about that ruling in years. She thought about it now. What was she holding? The man came on the second day. Elena was upright by then. Dr. Solis had been specific about what upright meant, which was sitting at the small table near the window with a blanket over her lap and food in front of her that she was being required to eat before the doctor would leave the room. Elena had eaten it. She was furious and frightened and had no idea where she was, but she was not stupid, and the baby needed food, so she'd eaten. The knock was 2 raps. Deliberate. Not asking exactly, but not assuming either. Something in the middle. Come in, Elena said, because Dr. Solis had already stepped to the side of the room in a way that said she'd been expecting this. He was taller than she'd expected. She had only the vague impression of a shape in the dark and strong arms. Nothing useful, but her brain had assembled something during the past day and a half, some composite of the kind of man who owned this house and sent private doctors to guest rooms at midnight. She'd assembled someone older, or maybe harder looking, someone easier to read. Lucian Viscari was not that. He was somewhere in his early 40s with the kind of dark that came from Mediterranean somewhere 2 or 3 generations back. He moved carefully. Not slowly, carefully, which was different, like a man accustomed to rooms that might be dangerous. He had a face that didn't offer much, sharp along the jaw and around the eyes, and those eyes were the kind of dark that held things rather than showing them. He was dressed simply. He sat in the chair Dr. Solis vacated without being invited to sit, and he looked at Elena with a directness that should have been rude, but somehow wasn't. "How's the baby?" he said. Not, "How are you?" The baby first. "Fine," Elena said. "Doctor." "Solis says we're both fine." He nodded once. Let the silence sit there, which was another thing that should have felt aggressive and didn't. He seemed, Elena thought, like a man who had learned to let silences do work for him. "I'm Elena Mercer," she said, when the silence had lasted long enough. "I know," he said. "Lucien Viscari." She knew that name. It took her 2 seconds to understand that she knew it, and another 2 to understand why, and then the architecture of the last day and a half rearranged itself in her head with a lurch she hoped didn't show on her face. Lucien Viscari. She'd seen that name in federal investigation documents that had crossed her desk when she was still working paralegal. Not a case she'd been assigned to, one she'd seen in passing, a stack of papers left in the wrong conference room. She'd seen it in newspaper articles that had carefully avoided saying anything that could be printed as fact. She'd heard it in the particular way people didn't say it when they were in rooms where it might matter. The city's most feared mafia boss was sitting in a chair in the room where she'd spent the last 36 hours recovering from nearly freezing to death. "You should know," Lucian said, watching her, "that I'm not going to hurt you." "That's what people say when they're going to hurt you," Elena said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the recognition of a thing he'd just tested and gotten a result from. "Usually," he said. "Not this time." "Why?" "Because you haven't done anything to deserve it." "That's also not always the criteria." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He leaned forward slightly in the chair, forearms on his knees. "My security team found a GPS transmitter in your bag. We disabled it. But I want you to know it was there." The room went very quiet. Elena looked at her bag on the chair across the room. The bag her father had given her. The bag she'd carried for 3 years, through 4 apartments, and a marriage, and a pregnancy. The bag she reached for on reflex when the world collapsed, because it was the thing her hands knew how to hold. "Show me," she said. He reached into his jacket and put it on the table. Small, flat, matte gray, the size of a thick coin. Elena picked it up, turned it over. She had no frame of reference for it technically, but she understood what it meant. Someone had put it there. Someone had been watching where she went, every day, for however long that device had been in the lining of her bag. She thought about Grant's hand on her wrist, the specific angle of the grip, the calm precision with which he'd walked her to the door, the way he'd said, "You need air." She thought about her father. She doesn't know what she's holding. "How long?" Elena asked. "Nikolai, my tech person, estimates 3 to 4 weeks minimum based on the battery profile. Could be longer. 3 to 4 weeks of her location broadcast to someone. Every doctor's appointment, every walk. Every night she'd spent at home while Grant had been in his office with the door shut, making calls she wasn't supposed to hear." Elena set the device back on the table. Her hands were steadier than she had any right to expect. "Someone put that in your bag," Lucius Cien said, "which means someone knew it was yours and had access to it, and they've been tracking you since before whatever happened 2 nights ago." "My husband found me listening outside his office," Elena said, "and put me outside." "What were you listening to?" "A phone call." She paused. "He said my father's name, and he said something about a safety deposit box." She looked at Lucian directly. "My father died 8 years ago. He was an investigative attorney. They ruled it a suicide." Lucian looked at her without moving, just took the information and held it. "You think that ruling was wrong?" he said. "I've thought it for 8 years," Elena said. "I didn't have any basis for anything else. I was 20. I didn't know how to prove anything. I just—" She stopped, started again. "He wasn't the kind of man who made that choice. I know that's what everyone says, but he wasn't." "What kind of man was he?" "He was building something," Elena said. "He was always building something. He had files everywhere, boxes of documents, journals he coded so I couldn't read them. I thought he was obsessive. I thought it was how he processed cases." She looked at the GPS device on the table. "I think maybe he was afraid." The room was quiet again. Outside the shuttered windows, the wind had dropped, the storm finally burning itself out. "There's something else," Lucien said. "My people have been looking at your husband's finances since last night. There's money moving through offshore accounts under his management, significant amounts. It's been moving for years, structured specifically to avoid pattern detection." He paused. "But the structure isn't consistent with embezzlement. It looks more like payment." "Payment for what?" "That's what we're trying to understand." Lucian stood the way he did everything, carefully, in a way that didn't signal what came next. "You're welcome to stay here until you deliver. You and your daughter will be safer here than anywhere you'd be able to reach right now." Elena looked at him. The man who had found her in a parking lot. The man whose name appeared in documents that federal investigators had assembled and couldn't act on. The man who had, for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, put his personal doctor in a guest room and disabled a tracking device and was now telling her things about her husband that no one else had ever thought to look for. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Lucy stopped at the door, considered the question with a seriousness that told her he had actually considered it, not just the appropriate-sounding answer. "Because whoever put that device in your bag didn't leave you in that parking lot by accident," he said. "They left you there because they thought they were done with you, and I don't like people who think they can discard things that aren't theirs to discard." He left. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Elena sat at the table for a long time with her hands flat on her stomach and the GPS device in the center of the table, dead and gray and no longer transmitting, and thought about her father's bag and her father's journals, and the particular way Grant had said she doesn't know what she's holding, as if the sentence had a shape that needed to be conveyed to whoever was on the other end of the line, as if the fact that she didn't know was important, as if it was the thing that had kept her alive, exactly as long as it had taken her to hear it. What was she holding? 300 miles away in an office building downtown, a phone rang twice. A man in an expensive suit picked it up and listened for 40 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Find out whose house she's in." And the hunt that had been sleeping, the one that had been satisfied briefly with a locked door in a snowstorm, woke up and started moving again. The phone that rang in the downtown office building rang again 12 hours later, and this time the man in the expensive suit didn't wait 40 seconds before speaking. "I need a name," he said. "Not a guess. A name." The voice on the other end gave him one. The suit's hand tightened on the receiver. "You're certain?" The convoy pulled security footage from 3 cameras between Renlow Drive and the lot. The plates are masked, but the formation is his. 6 vehicles, lead position, no police tail. It's Vescari. The suit set the receiver down without saying goodbye. He sat for a moment in the particular silence of a man recalculating a problem he thought he'd already solved. Then he picked up a different phone. Not the desk line, a personal cell, the kind with no carrier contract attached to it, and dialed a number he'd memorized rather than stored. "We have a complication," he said. But Marcus Fell had not slept. This was not unusual. Marcus operated on a schedule that other people would have called unsustainable and that Marcus called functional, built over 23 years of work that had started in military intelligence and migrated, by a series of choices that each seemed reasonable at the time, into the private sector. The private sector, in Marcus's case, meaning Lucien Vescari. He'd been with Lucien for 9 years. He knew the man's operational patterns better than he knew his own, knew the specific quality of Lucien's silences and what different versions of them meant, knew when to push and when to wait. He was waiting now. Standing in Nikolai's workspace, a converted basement room that smelled permanently of solder and cold coffee, watching Nikolai Brecht do 3 things at once on screens that most people would need a week to understand. "Talk to me," Marcus said. Nikolai didn't look up. He was 26 and had the posture of someone who'd spent most of his formative years in front of a monitor, slightly caved at the shoulders, neck carried forward. His hands on the keyboard were fast and precise in the way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with wiring. "The offshore account's under Mercer's management," he said. "I've been tracking the routing for 6 hours. "And?" "It's not embezzlement. Lucien said the same thing last night." Lucien was right. Nikolai hit a key, and a network map filled the center screen, nodes and lines, a web that sprawled across multiple screens before Nikolai zoomed out and the scale became visible. This is 11 years of structured payments moving through 14 jurisdictions. Amounts that are large enough to matter and small enough to avoid automatic flags. Someone built this architecture very carefully, over a very long time. Marcus looked at the map. Who's receiving? That's where it gets interesting. Nikolai zoomed in on a cluster of nodes near the center of the web. The receiving entities are shells. I'm not through all of them yet, couple more hours. But 3 of them have already resolved to real names. Judge Alan Harwick, 8th Circuit. State Senator David Poole, currently serving his 3rd term. And a private investment group called Meridian Capital, which I'm still pulling apart but whose founding board members include 2 executives from Casterly Ross Group. The room was quiet except for the sound of cooling fans. Casterly Ross, Marcus said. Defense contractors. Government adjacent. Very well protected. Nikolai looked up for the first time. Mercer isn't running this. He's a conduit. Someone is using his accounts as a payment channel. Has been for over a decade. Marcus looked at the network map for another few seconds. Then he turned and went upstairs. Lucien was in the east courtyard when Marcus found him, which was where Lucien went when he was thinking through something he hadn't resolved yet. The storm had ended overnight and left the world white and still, the courtyard's stone pavers invisible under 8 inches of clean snow. Lucien stood near the far wall with a coffee cup in his hand that had probably gone cold 20 minutes ago. Marcus gave him the summary. Took less than 2 minutes. Lucien listened without interrupting, which was standard. He didn't speak immediately afterward, which was also standard. Marcus waited. Harwick, Lucien said finally. 8th Circuit. He ruled on the Delano case. Marcus had not made that connection yet. He made it now. The Delano case, 4 years ago, a federal prosecution that had come very close to reaching Lucien's organization, before the key testimony was excluded on procedural grounds by an Eighth Circuit ruling that every attorney Marcus knew had described as, at minimum, unusual. You think it was bought? I think there's a pattern that starts with a judge making an unusual ruling and ends with money moving through an investment manager's offshore accounts, Lucian said. Whether those 2 points are connected by a line or a coincidence is what I need to know. Nikolai needs more time. Then he gets more time. Lucian looked at the coffee in his hand, set it on the wall beside him. And Elena? Still resting. Adara wants her to stay horizontal for at least another 24 hours. She's going to push back on that. She already did, at 6 this morning, from what Adara told me. The faintest change in Marcus's tone, not amusement exactly, but the ghost of it. Adara held the line. Lucian nodded. He was looking at the snow without seeing it, the way he looked at things when he was 3 steps ahead of the current conversation. Mercer hasn't reported her missing, he said. No missing persons filing. I had the police feeds checked. He put his pregnant wife outside in a blizzard and hasn't reported her missing. Lucien let that sit. Because he knows she didn't freeze to death. He has access to the GPS data. If the transmitter was live when we arrived, it was. Nikolai pulled the transmission log. It was broadcasting until he disabled it. Lucien picked up the coffee cup and then put it back down again without drinking. So Mercer knows she's alive, knows she's somewhere with resources since we disabled the tracker rather than just leaving it, and he's not calling the police. Because calling the police draws attention to why she was outside in the first place, Marcus said. Or because the people he's working for have a reason to keep this quiet that matters more to them than getting her back through official channels. Lucien turned from the wall. Get OC. I want the perimeter doubled tonight, and I want to watch on every approach to this property that has line of sight to the exterior. You think they'll move fast? I think they disabled a tracking device on a woman they've been monitoring for weeks, which means they know someone found her who has the technical capacity to do that, which means they're already calculating what she might have told whoever found her. Lucian moved toward the estate's side entrance. How fast would you move? Marcus didn't answer because the answer was obvious. Elena had not stayed horizontal. She had lasted until 9 in the morning, and then she had stood up, slowly tested her legs, found them functional, and moved to the window. Dr. Solis had documented her objection and then assisted her with the move, which Elena had categorized as a practical compromise, and the doctor had categorized as loss of the argument. The view from the window showed a large walled courtyard, stone, old, covered in snow. Beyond the far wall, the tops of bare trees were visible, and beyond them the upper floors of neighboring buildings, and beyond them the city's skyline, gray and familiar and very far away. She could orient herself by the skyline. West side, north of the financial district, old money neighborhood, the kind of streets where houses were separated from each other by walls and hedges and deliberate distance. She'd been standing at the window for 20 minutes when the knock came. It was not Lucien. It was a woman Elena hadn't seen before, early 30s, compact, dark-haired, moving with a precision that made Elena think of someone who had spent time in environments where movement had consequences. She was carrying a tablet. Mrs. Mercer, the woman said. Not a question. I'm Ria. I work for Mr. Viscari. Doing what? Elena asked. Research, mostly. Analysis. Ria came to stand beside the window and oriented the tablet so Elena could see the screen. I need you to look at something and tell me if you recognize it. On the screen was an image, a document, photographed rather than scanned, the edges slightly uneven. The letterhead at the top was from a firm Elena didn't know, Callaway, Merritt, and Associates. Her stomach dropped 3 floors. Where did you get this? Why? Elena asked. This is from a public filing archive. It's a case brief submitted 12 years ago in a wrongful death suit that was dismissed on procedural grounds. Ria watched Elena's face. The lead attorney was Richard Callaway. My father. Yes. Ria scrolled down. The suit was filed on behalf of the families of 7 people who died in a fire at a manufacturing facility in the industrial district. The fire was ruled accidental. Your father argued it was deliberate, that safety violations had been documented and suppressed, and that the suppression was facilitated by people who had financial interests in the facility's operating status. Elena looked at the document. Her father's name in the letterhead, his formal signature at the bottom. The particular way he'd signed things, never the full Richard, always R. Calloway because he'd thought the full first name was pretentious on legal documents. She hadn't seen his signature in 8 years. The suit was dismissed, Elena said, 3 weeks after filing, and 4 months later, your father was dead. Ria scrolled again. The 7 people who died in the fire. We pulled their employment records. 2 of them had filed internal complaints about safety violations in the 6 months before the fire. Those complaints were received by the facility's compliance officer, whose contract was issued through a subsidiary of Casterly Ross Group. The name landed on Elena without context. She didn't have Nikolai's network map. She didn't know what Casterly Ross was. But the shape of the thing was visible enough without the specific vocabulary. A chain of connection, deliberate and structured, between a fire that killed 7 people and a name that meant something to Lucian Viscari's organization. My father knew something about this, Elena said. We think he knew everything about it, Ria said. And we think he spent the last year of his life documenting it. She lowered the tablet. Mrs. Mercer, your father had a safety deposit box. The existence of the box was mentioned in his estate paperwork, but the box itself was never located. Your father's estate attorney, who handled the filing, died 14 months after your father. Car accident. The room felt different than it had 30 seconds ago. Not smaller exactly, more pressurized. You think there's something in that box, Elena said. I think your father put something in that box specifically because it was the safest container he could find. And I think whoever has been tracking you believes you know where it is. Ria paused. Do you? Elena didn't answer immediately. She turned back to the window and looked at the city skyline and thought about her father's hands. The careful way he'd given her the bag. Some things are worth keeping close. She'd always assumed he meant the bag itself. He gave me a key, Elena said. The words came out steadily, which surprised her. 14 months before he died. He said it was a spare key to his filing cabinet. I never used it. The filing cabinet was in his office, and after he died, the office was cleared out by the estate, and I didn't think about the key anymore. She stopped. It's on my keyring. I've been carrying it for 8 years. Ria was very still. Mrs. Mercer, what does this key look like? Small, flat, different metal than a house key, slightly heavier. Elena reached for the bag on the chair. She didn't open it, just put her hand on it. If it's not a filing cabinet key, what is it? I think, Ria said carefully, it's what they put the tracking device in your bag to find. Lucien came to the room 20 minutes later. He did not knock this time, which registered as different, a change in the calibration of something. Elena had the key in her hand. She'd pulled it from her keyring and was holding it flat on her palm, looking at it the way you look at an ordinary object after someone has told you it might be extraordinary. Small, dull, slightly heavier than it should be. 8 years on a keyring with her house keys and car key and the small mailbox key from an apartment she'd lived in 5 years ago and never removed. Lucien looked at the key. Safety deposit, he said. Not a question. Ria's conclusion, Elena said. Not mine. I wouldn't know the difference. Nikolai would. He crossed the room and looked at the key without touching it. May I? She held the key out. He picked it up between 2 fingers, examined the edge, the stamp on the flat face. A number sequence that Elena had looked at 100 times and never read as anything other than a serial number. This is a commercial bank key, he said. The stamp sequence here indicates the institution and branch. Nikolai can reverse it. To find out which bank and which box, Elena said. Yes. And then what? Elena watched him. We go open it. Not immediately. He set the key on the table. If your father put something in that box that people have been trying to locate for 8 years, then the moment we access it, anyone with a connection to that institution's security systems will know. He said it matter-of-factly, without drama. We need to know who we're dealing with before we open anything that's been sealed this long. Nikolai's network map, Elena said. He looked at her. Ria told me about the offshore accounts, the names. Elena picked the key back up, not because she needed it, but because putting it down felt wrong. Judges, politicians, a company called Casterly Ross. She met his eyes. How many people are on that map? Currently, 14 confirmed. Nikolai thinks there are more. And they've been operating for how long? Based on the payment structures, at minimum, 20 years. 20 years. Her father had started building his case 12 years ago, meaning whatever the fire and the suppressed complaints represented, it was already 8 years into an established arrangement. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, Richard Calloway had been chasing the upstream end of something that had already been running for nearly a decade when he found it. He never told me any of this, Elena said. He wouldn't have, Lucian said. If he was afraid. He wasn't afraid, Elena said, sharper than she intended. He wasn't. She stopped, rewound the sentence, thought about her father's journals, the coded pages, the boxes of documents she'd thought were obsession. Thought about the way he'd given her the bag, the weight of it, the particular ceremony of it. Maybe he was, she said, quieter. I was 20. He wouldn't have told me. Lucien said nothing. He let the silence be what it was, without trying to smooth it. I need to know what's in that box, Elena said. I know. Not for you, not for... She stopped again. He spent years building whatever's in there, and then he died. And they called it a suicide, and nobody looked twice, and he just... Her voice stayed level because she forced it to, jaw tight, the muscles of it visible. He deserves to have someone look at what he found. He will, Lucian said. I'm going to need 2 days. I have 2 days, Elena said. After that, the baby makes her own schedule. The thing that was almost a smile moved through his face again. Gone before it landed. The 2 days did not hold. Nikolai decoded the key stamp in 4 hours and identified the institution as Holloway Trust and Savings, a regional bank with 3 branches, one of which was located in the financial district 6 blocks from the building where Richard Calloway had kept his office. Lucien was briefed. A plan was constructed, careful, layered, the kind of plan that accounted for the probability that the bank's security systems had been compromised by people with the resources to compromise them. The plan lasted until the next morning when the first probe hit the estate's perimeter. Osei caught it on the exterior camera network at 4:17 in the morning. Not a physical approach, a digital one, someone running reconnaissance on the estate's visible security infrastructure. Sophisticated enough to be patient enough to take 2 hours to map what most probes would have rushed. Nikolai pulled the attack signature and was back to Lucien in under 20 minutes. It's not law enforcement, Nikolai said. He'd been awake since the previous morning, and it showed in everything except his hands, which stayed steady on the keyboard. The methodology is private sector. Specifically, it matches a pattern I've seen twice before. Once in a corporate espionage case out of Frankfurt, once in a breach attempt on a financial institution in Singapore. He pulled up a signature comparison. The tool set was developed by a company called Vantage Solutions. They do contracted intelligence work. For who? Lucien asked. Whoever pays them. Nikolai looked up. Right now, someone is paying them to find out everything there is to know about this building's security. Which means they've moved from locating Elena to planning an extraction, Marcus said from the corner. He'd been standing there long enough that Lucien had briefly forgotten he was present, which was a thing Marcus could do that Lucien had never fully understood. Or an elimination, Lucien said. Marcus didn't contradict him. Lucien stood in the center of Nikolai's workspace and ran the geometry of the problem. Elena was here. The key was here. Whoever was behind the network, 14 names confirmed, more pending, now knew roughly where here was and had engaged a professional intelligence contractor to assess the difficulty of coming in. They had not come in yet, which meant they were still in assessment. That window would close. When it did, the calculation would shift from reconnaissance to action, and the estate's defenses, while substantial, were not designed to hold against a coordinated professional assault of sufficient size. How long before they have what they need from the probe? Lucian asked. Nikolai checked his screens. At the current rate of information gathering, 6 to 8 hours, by noon today. Lucian looked at Marcus. We need to move her, Marcus said. We need to move all of it, Lucian said. The box first. If they breach this building and they don't find what they came for, they have no reason to. He stopped, finished the sentence differently than he'd started it. Get the cars ready. I want Elena briefed in the next 30 minutes. He went upstairs. Elena was awake. She'd been awake since 3, which she hadn't mentioned to anyone, lying in the dark with her hands on her stomach, and the specific quality of wakefulness that pregnancy in its final weeks produced. Not alertness exactly, but a kind of animal readiness, the body preparing for something it understood better than the mind did. When Lucien came to the door at 4:45, she was already dressed. He looked at her for a moment, said, You heard something? I didn't hear anything specific, Elena said, but this house stopped feeling the same way about 2 hours ago. She picked up her bag. The key was back on her ring. Where are we going? Holloway Trust, he said. Now, before the branch opens, with people I trust inside who will give us access without going through the standard system. You have people inside a bank. I have people in most places that matter, he said. It wasn't a boast, just a fact he was giving her the use of. Elena looked at him in the dim hallway light. The dark wool coat again, the same careful way of occupying space. The eyes that held things. She thought about what she was walking toward. 8 years of a locked box. Her father's last years of work, sealed and waiting. Every answer to every question she'd stopped letting herself ask because there had been no point in asking them. If something goes wrong, Elena said. Nothing. If something goes wrong, she said again, flat, not frightened, just practical. There's a digital copy of whatever's in that box, wherever it goes. Multiple copies, multiple places. That's my condition. He looked at her for a beat longer than necessary. Agreed, he said. Okay, Elena said. Let's go. They made it to the garage. They made it into the vehicles, 3 this time, not 6, traveling quiet and fast through the pre-dawn streets that were empty and gray and covered in the last remnants of snow, going brown at the edges. Nikolai was in the lead vehicle monitoring the digital perimeter of the estate, watching for any signal that the probe had escalated to action. They were 4 blocks from Holloway Trust when Nikolai's voice came through the earpiece Marcus was wearing. Marcus reached forward and touched the driver's shoulder. The vehicle stopped. What is it? Lucien asked. Marcus turned. His face said something had gone wrong before his words did. The bank, he said. Nikolai just pulled a security flag. Someone accessed Holloway Trust's internal system 40 minutes ago. He paused. Box number 417 was checked in the system. Someone just confirmed the box exists. The vehicle was silent. They already know which box, Elena said. Someone told them, Marcus said. Someone who knew the key stamp, the institution, the box number. He looked at Lucien. Someone on our end. The pre-dawn street was empty and gray, and the last remnants of snow were going brown at the edges, and Elena felt the baby shift beneath her ribs, the same warning flutter, the same small percussion that had been keeping time since the parking lot, and understood, with a clarity that was cold and complete, that they were not the hunters in this situation. They had never been the hunters. Someone had been 3 steps ahead of them from the moment Lucian's convoy stopped in a parking lot and found a woman in the snow. And whoever that someone was, they had just confirmed that the thing Richard Calloway had spent years building and his daughter had carried unknowing for 8 years was exactly where they thought it was. And they were already moving to take it. The vehicle didn't move. Lucien sat in the back seat with the city going gray and lightless around them and did the math on what Marcus had just said. Someone on our end. 4 words that rearranged every assumption the last 48 hours had been built on. He'd brought Elena here under the premise that the estate was secure, that his people were vetted, that the circle around this particular problem was tight enough to hold. Now, Nikolai was telling him the box had been pinged in the bank's system 40 minutes ago, which meant the leak hadn't happened tonight. It had happened before tonight. Someone had been feeding information outward before Lucien had even begun to understand what he was dealing with. "Pull back to the secondary location," Lucien said. His voice came out level because he made it level. "Not the estate." "The Harman building?" Osei asked. "Yes." The convoy turned. Elena said nothing in the seat beside him. She was looking straight ahead through the windshield at the pre-dawn street, and her hands were flat on her thighs, and she had the look of someone who had decided that the fear was information rather than an emergency, and was filing it accordingly. He noticed that about her and put it away. "Who knew?" Elena asked. Not accusing him, just asking. "About the key stamp and the box number, Nikolai, Ria, Marcus, and myself." He paused. "And whoever Nikolai communicated with inside the bank to arrange access." "Which is how many people?" "One. A man named Cord. He's worked with us for 6 years." 6 years is a long time," Elena said. "Long enough to decide something is worth more than loyalty." Lucien looked at her. She was still looking forward. "Yes," he said. "So what do we do?" "We go to the Harman building. We regroup, and then we go get the box anyway." Now she looked at him. "They know it's there. They know the box exists and which number it is. They don't have the key." He held her gaze. "And they can't open a safety deposit box at Holloway Trust without the key, regardless of who they know inside the institution. The physical key is required. It's written into the charter of that class of account. Dual authorization, key plus biometric of the registered holder." He paused. "Your father registered the box in his own name. His biometric is gone. But the estate transfer documentation your father's attorney filed before he died transferred access rights to the named heir." "To me," Elena said. "To you." He looked back at the road. "Which means you are still the only person who can open that box. Which means as long as you're not in their hands, the box stays closed." The vehicle moved through the city in silence for 40 seconds. "That's why they left me in the parking lot," Elena said. It came out quiet, almost to herself, but hard at the center. "They didn't discard me. They were going to come back. After the storm, when you were controllable." She said the word with something in it that wasn't anger exactly, something colder than anger and more durable. "They thought the cold would soften me up, that I'd wake up somewhere and be frightened enough to cooperate." "That's what I think, yes." "My husband left me in a blizzard," Elena said, "so that someone could pick me up afterward and use me as a key." She didn't ask him to confirm it. She knew it was true. She'd known it, he thought, since the moment she'd sat at the table in the guest room and heard the word transmitter and started rearranging everything she'd believed about her marriage into a shape that actually fit. The Harman building was a commercial property on the north side of the district that Lucien maintained under a holding company name for situations that required a location without his name above the door. It had a parking structure, a hardened interior, and enough ambiguity in its public profile to buy time. They pulled in at 5:12 in the morning and filed through the structure's lower level in the thin fluorescent light. Lucien sent Marcus ahead and stopped at the elevator with Elena. She was moving carefully. Not slowly, not weakly, carefully, the way she'd been moving since he'd found her in the parking lot, like a person who had learned to treat their own body as a thing to be negotiated with rather than trusted. "When did the contractions start?" he asked. She looked at him sharply. "You've been breathing differently for the last 10 minutes, he said. "Slower, more deliberate." For a moment, she looked like she was going to deny it. Then, "Early labor. Dr. Solis said it might start and stop." "It's not—" She stopped, breathed. "It's not consistent yet. We need Adara." "We need the box," Elena said. In that order, he called Adara Solis from the elevator. But Marcus had the Harman building's secure rooms set up by the time they arrived on the 4th floor. A windowless interior space with a table, multiple screens, and the particular quality of air that came from a room sealed against outside interference. Nikolai had been patched in remotely, his voice through the speakers thin and without sleep but precise. Ria sat at one end of the table with her tablet and did not look at anyone directly, which Lucien noted. He closed the door, stood at the head of the table and looked at the people in the room. Marcus to his left, Ria to his right, Ose by the door, two additional security personnel whose presence was function rather than counsel. Someone fed the box number to outside parties before midnight last night, Lucien said. No preamble. I want to know who, and I want to know now, not in an hour. Now. Silence. Ria's tablet was face down on the table. Her hands were around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. Ria, Lucien said. She looked up. Her face did the thing that faces do when a person has made a decision about something, and has been living with the weight of it, and has finally arrived at the moment when the weight either gets set down or buries them. He'd seen that face before. He'd seen it in rooms much worse than this one. I didn't give them the box number, she said. What did you give them? A pause of 3 seconds that felt much longer. The key stamp, she said, just the stamp. Before Nikolai decoded it, I didn't... She stopped. I didn't know what it was when I passed it. I was told it was a routine check, a cross-reference. Her voice stayed even, but her hands around the coffee cup had gone white at the knuckles. I was told it was internal. Who told you? Ria looked at the table. A man named Sayer. He contacted me 3 weeks ago. Said he was running an independent security review of our operations, that it had been authorized at the top and was need to know. She looked up. I checked the name against our personnel files. It matched. Because I have a consultant named Sayer, Lucien said, who retired 4 months ago. He let that land. Someone used his name and his file to build a false authorization, and you didn't verify it beyond the personnel match. No, Ria said. It cost her something to say it that flatly. He could see what it cost her. No, I didn't. Why? The question sat in the room. Ria put the coffee cup down. Because the authorization looked right, and I was tired, and She stopped. Started again, differently. Because I wanted it to be what it looked like. I didn't want to find something wrong with it. The room stayed quiet. It was Marcus who spoke. She didn't know what she was passing, he said, not defending her, stating a position that had evidentiary basis. If she had known, I know, Lucien said. He kept his eyes on Ria. You understand that someone built a profile of our operations well enough to know which of my people to approach and with what kind of authorization. You understand that? Ria nodded once. Which means this has been in development longer than the last 48 hours, Lucien said. Someone has been watching our organization for a long time, long enough to map it. He turned to Marcus. Get Nikolai to pull every external contact Ria's had in the last 6 weeks. I want to know every touch point this Sayer identity established. Marcus made a call. Lucien moved around the table to stand in front of the wall of screens. The network map Nikolai had built was up on the center screen. 14 names, their connections, the web of payments and influence that Richard Calloway had apparently spent the last year of his life tracking. Elena was at the far end of the table, seated, with Dr. Solis standing beside her in a posture that said the doctor had already assessed the situation and made certain determinations. Elena was looking at the network map. 14 names, she said. How many of them know you have me? As of last night, all of them, Nikolai's voice said through the speaker. Once the tracking data from the GPS device was compromised and my disable registered in their system, the information would have distributed to every node on this network within hours. These people have a protocol for exactly this scenario. What scenario? Someone getting too close to the archive, Nikolai said. Your father got close 12 years ago. The suit was killed in 3 weeks. The attorney died 14 months later. Whatever is in that box, they have an established response to it being found. Elena turned from the screen to Lucien. So they're going to come here. They're going to try. And the box? She pressed both hands flat on the table surface, leveraging herself upright. Dr. Solis moved to assist. Elena didn't wave her off, but didn't use her either. She got herself up on her own. If we can't go to the bank without walking into whatever they've set up there, how do we get the box? Lucien looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the screen. There's another way in. Nikolai said. Holloway Trust secondary entrance, the one used for after-hours access by registered accounts, is on the north side of the building, separate keypad, separate camera system. The primary internal network that was probed last night doesn't extend to that entrance because it runs on a legacy system the bank hasn't integrated yet. A pause. If we go in through the secondary entrance before the branch opens, before whatever they have positioned at the primary entrance is active, we have a window. How wide a window? Lucian asked. An hour? Maybe less? Lucian checked his watch. 5:41. The branch opened at 8:30. Secondary access was available from 6. That left 19 minutes. We go now, he said. Lucian. Marcus's voice had a specific register that it only took when Marcus had a concern he'd assessed as non-negotiable. She's in early labor. I know. If this goes wrong inside that bank... Marcus. Lucien looked at him. If we don't go now, the window closes and they consolidate their position and that box stays closed, forever. Because they'll move it or destroy it or seal the account and there'll be nothing left of what her father built. The room was quiet for a moment. Elena picked up her bag. I said I wanted copies, she said. Multiple locations. That's still my condition. Nikolai, Lucian said. Already have a distribution protocol set up, Nikolai's voice said. The moment the box opens and content is digitized, it goes to 7 separate encrypted locations simultaneously. Elena looked at Lucian. Then let's go. The secondary entrance to Holloway Trust was a steel door set into the north wall of the building, unmarked except for a small keypad to the right of the frame. The street was empty at this hour, the financial district not yet alive, the cold holding everything in suspension. They came in 2 vehicles. Lucien, Elena, Osei, and Dr. Solis in one, Marcus, and 2 security personnel in the other. The man waiting at the secondary entrance was not Cord. He was younger, with the particular look of someone who was trying not to show that they were frightened. He gave his name as Petir. He said Cord had called him at 5 in the morning with instructions. He said he didn't know who Cord had spoken to first. Lucian looked at the man for 2 seconds. Then he looked at Osei. Osei put himself between Petir and the vehicle containing Elena. What did Cord tell you to do? Lucien asked. Let you in, Peter said. His voice was steady, but his jaw was doing something it was trying not to do. The secondary system, let you access the after-hours suite. And then? A pause that lasted too long. And then send a confirmation code. To whom? I wasn't given a name, just a number. Lucian took the phone from his own jacket, held it out to Peter. Enter the number. Peter looked at the phone, looked at Osei, looked at Lucien, entered the number. Lucien looked at what Peter had typed, sent it to Nikolai's system via text without speaking, waited. Nikolai came back in 40 seconds. That number routes through 2 relays, his voice said quietly through Lucien's earpiece. It terminates at a cell registered to a man named Andrew Voss. Voss is listed as the Director of External Affairs for Casterly Ross Group, the man at the top of the network map, the name that had appeared at the center of every financial thread Nikolai had traced for the last 2 days. Lucien pocketed his phone. Open the door, Peter, he said. Peter opened the door. Choked. The after-hours suite was a long corridor lined with individual vault access rooms, each with a heavy door and a numbered panel. The institutional carpet absorbed sound. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency that was just barely audible. The air had the refrigerated, preserved quality of a place where things were meant to outlast the people who put them there. Room 417 was at the far end. Elena walked the corridor with her bag against her side and her key in her hand, and each step was the step of a person crossing a distance that had been 8 years wide. Lucien walked beside her, Osei behind them, watching the entrance. Dr. Solis had positioned herself at the corridor's midpoint with a bag that contained everything she would need if what was coming came now, rather than later. The panel beside room 417 accepted the key, accepted Elena's biometric, her fingerprint, her retinal scan, the system registering her as Richard Calloway's rightful heir in the 3-second pause before the locks disengaged. The door swung inward. The box inside was a standard unit, gray metal, 40 centimeters by 25, the kind of unremarkable container that had been holding the most important secret Elena Mercer had ever been adjacent to since before she knew it existed. She put it on the small table inside the room. She put her hands on either side of it. She stood like that for a moment. Lucien looked at her from the doorway, said nothing. Elena opened the box. There was no cash, no jewelry, no certificates or bonds. There was a stack of documents, dense, meticulous, the kind of archival work that could only have been built by someone who had been both terrified and determined in equal measure. Beneath the documents, a set of USB drives, 3 of them, black, labeled only with dates. Beneath the drives, a small sealed envelope with her name on it, written in her father's handwriting, in the particular way he'd written her name all her life, with the capital E slightly larger than necessary, a habit she'd never asked him about, and would never be able to ask him about now. She picked up the envelope, held it. "Later," Lucien said quietly, "digitize first." She put the envelope down, picked up the first document. Her hands were steady in the way that hands are steady when a person is operating beyond the reach of ordinary feeling, in the register where the body understands that feeling will have to wait. The documents were organized chronologically. The first entry was dated 22 years ago, a memorandum, copied, marked confidential, bearing the letterhead of a company that no longer existed, and the signatures of 3 men whose names, when Elena read them, she did not recognize. But the subject line was clear. The subject line read, "Facility closure, accelerated timeline, authorization to proceed." 12 pages later, there was a photograph. 8 men standing in what appeared to be a conference room, formal, posed, the year legible in the image's metadata stamp. 3 of the men she didn't know. 2 she recognized from Nikolai's network map. One was Grant Mercer, looking 15 years younger and not yet wearing the particular expression of a man who had learned to be careful about what his face did in photographs. One was Alan Harwick, currently sitting as a judge on the 8th Circuit. And one was a man in a dark suit at the center of the photograph, older than the others, standing with the ease of a man who understood that the room was arranged around him. A man whose name, when Elena found it in the document beneath the photograph, was Andrew Voss, the Casterly Ross executive, the number Peter had been waiting to send a confirmation code to, the center of the web. "Nikolai," Lucien said into his earpiece, "we're ready to digitize." The process took 11 minutes, 3 drives, 43 documents, 17 photographs, 2 audio files, compressed, labels indicating they were recorded conversations. Her father's voice, she knew, though she didn't let herself think about that yet. Nikolai's system received them in sequence, and the distribution protocol activated automatically. Copies branching to 7 locations simultaneously, air-gapped, encrypted, redundant. When the last file transferred, Elena sat down in the single chair in the vault room because her body made the decision before she did. Dr. Solis was at the doorway in under 10 seconds. "Breathe," the doctor said. "I am breathing." "Breathe like you mean it." Elena breathed. The contractions were coming closer together. She could feel them now without trying not to. A tightening that started at the base of her back and moved forward, not yet urgent, not yet demanding, but making its intentions clear. The baby had been patient through the entirety of this and was apparently reaching the limits of her patience. "Can you walk?" Lucien asked. "Yes," Elena said. Then, because Dr. Solis was looking at her with a professional frankness that didn't leave room for useful lies. "Probably." They moved back down the corridor. Ose was at the entrance. Everything was as they'd left it. The street empty. The early morning city still suspended between dark and usable light. They were 20 feet from the secondary door when Lucien's earpiece came alive with Nikolai's voice, and the register of it, not flat, not controlled, but carrying something underneath that Nikolai almost never let carry, stopped Lucien's feet before his mind had processed the words. "Lucien?" Nikolai said. "Marcus just went dark." Lucien stopped walking. "What do you mean, dark?" His comms, his tracker, everything cut simultaneously 4 minutes ago. A pause. "His vehicle hasn't moved." The secondary door was 8 feet ahead. Ose had his hand on it. "Don't open that door," Lucien said. Ose pulled his hand back. The building they were in was quiet. The corridor behind them was quiet. Everything was quiet in the particular way that things are quiet just before they stop being quiet. And Lucien stood in the fluorescent buzz of the after-hours corridor with Elena beside him and the box under her arm and understood, with the clarity that came from 22 years of surviving things that should have killed him, that they had not been followed here. They had been led here. The Voss network had not needed to find the bank. They had known the key would come here eventually. They had known because they'd known the key existed, and they'd known Elena would want to open it, and they'd known that whoever was protecting her would bring her here when the window looked right. They'd made the window look right. They'd made the secondary entrance look like an opportunity, and Cord's absence look like a coincidence, and Peter's presence look like a solution. And Marcus, who had been with Lucien for 9 years, who had known every operational decision made in the last 48 hours, who had been the one to suggest the harm in building, who had been the one to communicate Nikolai's discovery of the secondary entrance. Marcus was dark. "Tell me he's just in a dead zone," Lucien said. "There are no dead zones on his equipment," Nikolai said. "I built the system." Elena was looking at Lucien. She had read his face in the last 2 seconds and understood something of what it contained, and the thing in her own face in response was not fear, but the particular hardness of someone who has just had the floor removed from under them and has decided to treat the falling as a condition of existence rather than a catastrophe. "Marcus," she said. "Possibly," Lucien said. "He knew everything." "Yes." "Then they know the files transferred," she said. "They know the copies exist." "Yes." "And they know we're in here." She looked at the secondary door. 8 feet, a street on the other side that might have anything on it now. "They're going to come through that door." "Or the primary entrance," Lucien said. "Or both." "What do we do?" Lucien looked at the vault room door behind them, at the corridor, at the 2 security personnel who were now standing with their full attention on the entrances, and the particular readiness of people who understood that something had shifted from preparation to imminence. He looked at Elena, 8 months pregnant, with her father's archive under her arm and a contraction moving through her that she was managing by breath alone and refusing to let show any more than she had to. He looked at Osei. Osei was already looking back at him with the face that said, "Give me an instruction and I will execute it, but give it to me now." There was a service elevator at the end of the vault corridor, behind the last room. It ran to the building's sub-basement, which connected by maintenance tunnel to the parking structure 3 addresses east. Lucien had used that tunnel once, 6 years ago, for reasons he hadn't needed to revisit until now. He'd verified it was still operational when he'd chosen Holloway Trust as the institution to approach, a habit of mind that had seemed like excessive caution at the time, and now seemed like the only thing standing between Elena Mercer and the people who had spent 8 years trying to make sure her father's archive never surfaced. "Service elevator," he said. "Now." They moved. Behind them, at the far end of the corridor, the primary entrance to Holloway Trust's after-hours suite opened with the clean mechanical sound of something that had been unlocked from outside by people with the access required to unlock it. And the footsteps that followed were not hurried. They were measured, deliberate, the footsteps of people who believed they had arrived at a solved problem. They were 8 seconds behind. The elevator doors closed. In the vehicle outside the building's north face, Marcus Fell sat with his phone in his hand and a man he'd known for 4 years sitting across from him in the back seat. A man who had called him 6 weeks ago with the particular voice of someone delivering an offer rather than a request. The offer had included his daughter's medical debt, his brother's pending legal case, and a number that Marcus had spent 2 weeks trying to convince himself he could refuse. He had not been able to refuse it. He looked at the phone in his hand, looked at the man across from him, said, "I need you to understand that I didn't want this." The man across from him, who was not Voss, who was not anyone Elena would recognize, who was simply the outermost visible layer of a structure that went much deeper than anyone in that building had yet understood, said nothing. He looked at the phone. He looked at Marcus. "Lucien's going to survive this," Marcus said. "You understand that. Whatever you've set up in there, he's going to survive it, and then he's going to come looking. And when he finds you, there won't be anything I can do to—" "Stop talking," the man said. Marcus stopped talking. The phone in his hand buzzed once, a notification from Nikolai's system, automated, protocol-driven, the kind of alert that distributed to every registered device on the network when a specific event occurred. He looked at the screen, read the notification, looked up. "The files transferred," he said. "All of them. 7 locations. It's done." The man across from him went very still. Marcus looked at him. "You can't unring that bell," he said. "Whatever Voss told you, whatever the plan is, the archive is out. It's in 7 places right now. You can't get it back." The man's stillness lasted 3 more seconds. Then he reached for his own phone and made a call and said 5 words that Marcus, in the 11 years of his professional life that had prepared him for a great many things, had never heard directed at himself before. He heard them now. And then Marcus understood, with the specific and irrevocable clarity of a man who has made the last miscalculation he will ever make, that the price of the offer he had accepted 6 weeks ago was not money or freedom or the resolution of his daughter's debt. The price was everything else. The service elevator was not designed for 6 people. It was designed for maintenance staff and supply carts, a 4x6 steel box that smelled of machine oil and age, with a single overhead bulb that flickered when the car began to descend. Lucien counted the seconds. Jose was at the door panel watching the indicator light. The 2 security personnel, whose names were Dex and Carla, had positioned themselves in front of Elena without being told to, which was the kind of trained instinct that Lucien paid for and was grateful for now in the way you're grateful for things you never wanted to need. Dr. Solis had Elena's wrist and was counting something internally, her lips barely moving. Elena was breathing in the pattern that was no longer preliminary. Lucien could hear it, measured, deliberate, the specific rhythm of a woman who had decided that her body's schedule was going to have to negotiate with the current situation rather than dictate to it. The elevator reached the sub-basement. The doors opened onto a concrete corridor lit by emergency strips along the floor, the kind of lighting that existed to guide people out rather than to illuminate anything useful. Cold down here. The kind of cold that came from below ground in the winter pressing through the foundation. "Left," Lucien said. He'd walked this tunnel once, 6 years ago, in the opposite direction, at a pace that had been unhurried because the situation had been nothing like this. He remembered the turns. He hoped he remembered correctly. They moved. The tunnel was 400 meters, 2 turns, one section where the ceiling dropped low enough that Dex had to hunch his shoulders. Elena moved without complaint. Lucien stayed at her left side and kept his pace matched to hers, and didn't tell her to hurry because she was already moving as fast as she was going to move, and she knew it, and he knew it, and adding words to that wouldn't change the physics. Halfway through, Lucien's earpiece came back to life. Nikolai's voice, and the register of it, had changed again, tighter now, carrying something that Nikolai almost never let surface. "They have the corridor," Nikolai said. "Primary and secondary both, 4 personnel each. They're doing a sweep. They'll reach the service elevator in approximately 4 minutes. We're in the tunnel. I know, the exit into the parking structure is being watched. 1 vehicle, north side of the structure, positioned to cover the tunnel exit." A pause. "That vehicle has been there since before you went into the bank." Lucien processed that. They knew about the tunnel. "They knew about everything," Nikolai said. "Lucien, Marcus briefed them on every contingency location you've used in the last 9 years. The Harmon building is compromised. The safe house on Veller Street is compromised. The secondary vehicle staging point. Is there anything they don't have?" A pause of 2 seconds that Nikolai didn't usually need. "The warehouse on Decker," he said. "It's not in any operational file I can find. You've never used it for anything official." Lucien had purchased the Decker warehouse 11 years ago under a corporate name that had no connection to any of his registered holdings. He'd done it on instinct, the way he did several things per year on instinct, because 22 years of survival had taught him that the gap between what enemies know about you and what they don't is the only gap worth preserving. He'd never briefed Marcus on it, never briefed anyone on it. It existed in no document. "Can you get us a vehicle at the tunnel exit?" Lucien asked. "Working on it. 2 minutes. We have 4 before they reach the elevator." I said, "I'm working on it." They reached the tunnel's exit point, a heavy steel door with a manual bar lock, the kind that required both hands and body weight. Dex hit it first, the bar releasing with a groan of metal that was loud enough in the concrete quiet that Elena's eyes moved to the tunnel behind them before she could stop them. The door opened onto the parking structure's lowest level. The vehicle Nikolai had described was visible at the far end of the level, a dark SUV, engine running, exhaust curling in the cold, 60 meters away. One person visible in the driver's position, possibly more inside. Lucian looked at Osei. "I see it," Osei said. "I need 30 seconds, Lucian said. He looked at Dex and Carla. "Get her to the east stairwell. Third level, there's a fire door that exits onto the service alley on the building's east face." "And from there?" Dex asked. "Nikolai will have something by then." Lucian looked at Elena. She was looking at him with the expression that he had come to recognize in the last 48 hours as her version of refusing to be managed. "Don't tell me to stay somewhere." "I'm not," he said. "I'm telling you where I'm going to meet you." Something shifted in her face, not softened, recalibrated. "Third level fire door," she said. "Yes." She turned and moved toward the stairwell with Dex and Carla flanking her and Dr. Solus at her back. Lucien watched until they were inside the stairwell door. Then he looked at Osei. "The driver sees us," Osei said. The SUV at the far end of the level had not moved, but its headlights had come on. "I know," Lucian said. "Let's give them something to focus on." Bob. What happened in the parking structure's lower level took 40 seconds and produced enough noise that the building's automated alarm system registered an event and transmitted a notification to the monitoring company, which would eventually result in a police response that arrived 11 minutes too late to be relevant to anything. Lucien and Osei moved away from the stairwell door in opposite directions, which split the SUV's occupants' attention before they had fully committed to a direction, and the two men who exited the vehicle found themselves addressing a geometry that hadn't been in their planning. Lucien took the one on the left. He was not a man who fought cleanly because clean fighting was something that happened in controlled environments with rules, and controlled environments with rules were not the environment his life had generated. He fought the way he did everything, with a precision that came from understanding where a situation was going before it arrived there, and being positioned accordingly. The man on the left went down in 9 seconds. Osei's took 7. The driver stayed in the vehicle until Osei removed him, which took slightly longer because the driver had made the reasonable decision to lock the door, and that decision needed to be overcome. The vehicle's radio was live. Lucien listened to it for 5 seconds, heard the voice of someone directing the sweep inside the bank, heard the word elevator, heard the word clear, heard the pause that meant they'd found the elevator had been used and were following the logic of where it went. He pulled the radio from the mount and got into the driver's seat. "Third level," Osei said from the passenger side. Lucien drove up 2 levels. Achamed. The east stairwell fire door opened and Dex came through first, checking the alley, then Elena, then Carla, then Dr. Solus. The alley was narrow and cold and smelled of the industrial waste bins lined against the building's exterior wall. Elena came through the door and felt the cold hit her face and focused on it. The cold is information. The cold is something real and present that was not the contraction building at the base of her back. She heard the vehicle before she saw it, engine sound echoing off the alley walls coming from the south end. Then headlights. Dex stepped in front of her. The vehicle stopped. The window came down. Osei's face. Elena let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The drive to the Decker warehouse was 16 minutes at the pace Lucien set, which was fast enough to put distance between them and the bank, and careful enough not to pull police attention. Nikolai was in their ears the whole way, running surveillance on every camera feed he could access along the route, watching for tails, watching for the secondary response that the Voss network would organize once they understood that the tunnel exit had been neutralized. Elena sat in the back between Dr. Solus and Carla, and breathed through what was happening in her body, and looked out the window at the city going past. Ordinary storefronts, early morning delivery trucks, people beginning to appear on sidewalks with coffee cups, and the faces of people who had gotten enough sleep and were moving through a world that had not, in the last 12 hours, been dismantled around them. She had her father's sealed envelope in her bag. She had not opened it. She was not going to open it until she was in a room that was not moving, and the immediate emergency was resolved, and she could give whatever was inside it the attention it had waited 8 years to receive. She kept her hand on the bag the way she'd been keeping her hand on it since the night she grabbed it on instinct in a dark hallway, and thought about her father's voice in the audio files on those drives, compressed and waiting in 7 encrypted locations, and about Grant's hands on her wrist and the specific geometry of what his entire marriage to her had actually been. Not a husband who'd grown cold, not a man who'd made bad choices and worse ones, and finally an unforgivable one. A contractor. A long-term operative embedded in her life with a specific function. Find the key. Monitor the air. Make sure the archive stays buried. She'd been a surveillance target from the day she'd met him. Possibly before. Grant knew my father, she said. Lucien in the front passenger seat. He didn't turn around. Yes. He was already working for them when we met. That's what the photograph suggests. So the marriage, she stopped. Not because the words weren't there, but because the weight of them was a particular kind. The kind that required more structural support than a moving vehicle at 6 a.m. could provide. She set it aside, picked up the available information instead. He'll know where we're going. He doesn't know the Decker location. He knew Marcus, Elena said, and Marcus knew things you thought he didn't. Lucien was quiet for a beat. Yes, he said. He did. So we have, what? An hour before they regroup and come looking? Less, probably. Then we need to use the files, Elena said. Not later, now, while they're still reacting. Lucien turned around then, looked at her in the back seat. Nikolai has the 7 locations, Elena said. But 7 encrypted locations isn't the same as the information being out. It's still contained. It's still something they can try to suppress or discredit or bury if they move fast enough and have the right people in the right places. She held his gaze. My father spent years building that archive. The reason it's dangerous to them isn't just that it exists. It's what happens when the right people see it. Who are the right people? Lucien asked. A federal investigator who isn't on their payroll. A journalist who can't be bought. More than one. Enough that even if they get to some of them, they can't get to all of them. She looked at him. You told me you have people in most places that matter. Does that include the press? A pause. I have a contact, he said. One, she's not someone I use lightly. Use her now, Elena said. And Nikolai needs to identify which federal agents have been outside the network's influence. That's possible from the payment records. Anyone whose name doesn't appear anywhere in the archive. That's a significant operation to run in. I know what it is, Elena said. I'm telling you what needs to happen. She looked out the window and back again. My father built the case. I'm going to be the one who delivers it. That's what he was waiting for. That's what the envelope is about. She put her hand on the bag again. He knew I'd find it. He knew someone would have to carry it out. Lucien looked at her for a moment more. Then he turned back to the front. Nikolai, he said into the earpiece, I need 2 things simultaneously. Tell me, Nikolai said. Every federal name in the 8th Circuit and DOJ infrastructure that doesn't appear anywhere in the archive's payment records, and a secure line to Mafia Boss. A pause. Mafia Boss, Nikolai repeated. Yes. She's going to want to know why I'm calling. Tell her someone found Richard Calloway's archive, Lucien said. She'll know what that means. The Decker warehouse was a 3-story industrial building on the river-facing side of the district. Its brick exterior dark with age and weather, its signage removed years ago when the previous tenant had vacated. Inside, concrete floors, high ceilings, the cold that came from a building that was heated only to functional minimums. Lucien had maintained it in working order through a property management company that asked no questions because the contract paid well enough that questions were an unnecessary friction. There was a ground floor office space, 4 walls, windows that faced the interior of the warehouse rather than the street, a table, chairs, a generator-backed power system, hardwired communications that Nikolai could access remotely. Lucien had never thought of it as a refuge. He thought of it as one now. Dr. Solis made her assessment the moment they were through the door, and her assessment was stated in 3 words: "We need supplies." "Nikolai has a list of what we carry in the vehicle kit," Lucian said. "I know what's in the vehicle kit," she said. "I need to know how far we are from a hospital." 11 minutes. "Then we have 11 minutes of margin," she said. "Possibly 12. She looked at Elena. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand," Elena said. She was sitting in one of the chairs with her hands braced on the table, and the way she was sitting said that she was managing something that was actively demanding more of her attention than she was allocating to it. "Tell me what you need me to do." "Stop doing things for 5 minutes," Dr. Solis said. "That would be a start." Nikolai had the federal contacts list in 22 minutes. He ran the archive's payment records against every name in the relevant enforcement and prosecution infrastructure and identified 11 individuals whose names appeared nowhere in the documented network. 3 of them were in a position to receive and act on the archive's contents with enough institutional authority to initiate a process that couldn't easily be shut down from above. He sent the names to Lucian's screen. Mara Voss, no relation to Andrew Voss, a coincidence that Nikolai had flagged and verified, was an investigative journalist who had spent 14 years covering financial crime for a publication with enough legal resources and editorial independence to withstand the kind of pressure the Casterly-Ross network could generate. She was also the journalist who, 8 years ago, had written the only published piece that had questioned the official conclusion on Richard Calloway's death. A piece that had run 3 paragraphs before her editor at the time had killed it for reasons Mara had described in subsequent years as institutional cowardice, and that the archive, if Nikolai's reading was correct, would reveal as something more deliberate. She answered Lucien's call on the second ring at 6:47 in the morning, which told him she had not been asleep. "Viscari," she said. Her voice was the voice of someone who had been awake for a while already and was not surprised by the call. "You know who I am," he said. "Everyone knows who you are." A pause. "You said Richard Calloway's archive." "Where?" 7 locations. Digitized 20 minutes ago from the original physical documents. 43 documents, 17 photographs, 2 audio recordings. He paused. The audio is his voice. The line was quiet for 4 seconds. "Is his daughter alive?" Mara asked. Lucian looked across the warehouse office to where Elena sat with Dr. Solis beside her, breathing through something she was refusing to let derail the current conversation. "Yes," he said. "I need direct access to the files," Mara said. "Not a summary, not selected documents, everything. You'll have it in the next 30 minutes. I need something from you in return." "What?" "Speed," Lucian said. "Whatever you're going to do with this, you do it before they have time to organize a legal suppression. You know what they're capable of." "I've known for 8 years," Mara said. "Send the files." Lucien nodded at Nikolai's camera. One of the 7 locations began its transfer. They found the warehouse at 7:19. Lucien didn't know how. The location wasn't in any file Marcus had accessed, wasn't in any operational record, wasn't connected to his name by any documentation he'd ever created. He went through the possibilities in the 30 seconds between Osei's warning, motion on the east perimeter, vehicle on the river road, moving slow, and the moment when slow became stopped and the vehicle's doors opened. One possibility, surveillance they hadn't detected, placed on the vehicles before the tunnel, before the bank, before any of it. A deeper penetration than Marcus, a layer of monitoring that had been running beneath the layer they knew about. Another, someone inside the warehouse itself had transmitted a location. He looked at the people in the room. Osei, Dex, Carla, Dr. Solis, Elena. He looked at Carla. Carla was looking at the floor. "Carla," he said. She looked up. Her face did the same thing Ria's face had done in the Harmon building, and the similarity of it, 2 people in 2 rooms in the same morning wearing the same expression, told him everything that the expression itself was trying not to tell him. "How long?" he asked. "Lucien, how long?" 3 weeks, she said, flat. "They have my brother. They've had him since—" She stopped. Her jaw was doing something. They said if I gave them a location, just one location, they'd let him go. Did they let him go? Her face answered before she did. Lucien looked at Dex. Dex moved to Carla, and she didn't resist because there was nothing left in her posture that had any resistance in it. She had spent 3 weeks carrying something that had eaten through her from the inside, and now it was out, and she was just empty. "What's coming?" Lucien asked her. 8 personnel, she said. Armed. The directive is to retrieve the woman and destroy any physical evidence on site. "Retrieve," Elena said from across the room. Her voice was sharp and steady. "Not, they need you alive," Carla said. "To confirm the archive is complete. They don't know what was in the box. They need you to verify it." "Because there might be more," Elena said. "They think my father might have split the archive across multiple locations." "Did he?" Lucien asked. Elena thought about the envelope in her bag, the one addressed in her father's handwriting, the one she hadn't opened. "I don't know yet," she said. 8 personnel. The warehouse had 4 entry points: main vehicle door east, personnel door north, roof access via exterior ladder south, and a loading dock door west that hadn't been used in years but was structurally functional. Lucien had 4 people, including himself, one of whom had just been removed from the operational equation, and Elena, who was in labor, and a doctor. "Nikolai," Lucien said. "I heard," Nikolai said. "I'm already on the building's exterior camera grid. I can give you eyes on all 4 approaches." "And the files? Mara?" "Transfer is complete. She's reading." A pause. "She's already made 2 calls. I don't know to whom." "The federal contacts?" "Sending the archive to the top 3 names on the list now." "Lucien, once those transfers complete, this information is functionally public. There's nothing they can do to suppress it that won't itself become evidence." "How long for the transfers?" 7 minutes. 8 personnel, 4 approaches, 7 minutes. "Osei," Lucien said. "I know," Osei said. He was already moving toward the weapons locker in the office's back wall, moving with the contained efficiency of a man who had been a soldier long enough that the transition from waiting to action didn't require a gear change. Dex moved with him. Elena pushed herself up from the chair. "Sit down," Dr. Solis said. "I'm not sitting down," Elena said. She was upright, one hand on the table, and the contraction that was moving through her was visible in the set of her jaw and the way her breath came out measured and forceful. She waited for it to pass. It passed. She straightened. "Give me a phone," she said to Lucien. "Elena." "The audio files," she said. "My father's voice. I haven't listened to them yet, but you said the archive includes recorded conversations." She held out her hand. "If those recordings name Voss directly, if they name any of them directly in their own words, I want that on a live feed, right now, not tomorrow's publication, directly to a broadcast." She looked at him. "You have a contact in the press. Is there a way to go live?" Lucien looked at her for 1 second. "Nikolai," he said. "There's a way," Nikolai said. "It requires—" "Do it," Elena said. "If we have 7 minutes, we use 7 minutes." The first sound at the east perimeter came at 7:23. Not an attempt at silence, because 8 personnel arriving with a specific directive don't need silence, they need speed. The main vehicle door registered impact stress on its frame, and Nikolai's voice said east door, and then the warehouse's interior filled with the specific kind of sound that a large industrial space produces when people are moving through it fast and with purpose. Lucien was already across the room. Osei took the east approach. Dex took north. Lucien moved to a position that covered the interior space between the office and the main floor, and what happened in the next 4 minutes happened the way things happen when people on both sides of a situation understand that the margin for error has been reduced to 0. 2 of the 8 went down in the first 90 seconds. The warehouse's interior geography worked against the approaching team. The high shelving units, the machinery bays, the catwalks above the main floor. And Lucien knew the space, and they didn't, which was the only advantage that mattered, and he used it without waste. He moved through it the way water moves through a known landscape, fast and low, and without announcing direction before arrival. And when the third man came through a gap in the shelving units that opened onto the office corridor, Lucien was already in the gap ahead of him, and the man had time to register that the geometry was wrong before it stopped being a problem he needed to solve. Inside the office, Elena had the phone. Nikolai had the feed open. Not broadcast. Not yet. 30 seconds from broadcast. The technical architecture assembling itself in real time. She had the first audio file playing through the phone's speaker, her father's voice filling the room in the particular timbre of a recording made in a quiet office by a man speaking with the deliberate clarity of someone who knew they were making a record for an audience they might not live to address directly. "My name is Richard Calloway," the recording said. "I am an attorney. I am making this record on the 14th of March, in the year my daughter turns 20. I am making it because I have reason to believe I am being watched, and I have reason to believe I will not be allowed to complete what I started. So I'm putting this on record now, while I can, for whoever finds it." Elena's hand was flat on the table. Dr. Solis was beside her, and the doctor's professional composure had not altered, but her hand was near Elena's arm in a way that said she understood something was happening that was more than the clinical. Her father's voice continued. "In the spring of 22 years ago, a manufacturing facility operated under a subsidiary of a company called Casterly Ross Group experienced a fire. 7 people died. The fire was ruled accidental. It was not accidental. I have documentation of the decision to accelerate the facility's closure in a manner that the operators knew would violate safety protocols. I have documentation of internal complaints suppressed by the compliance office. I have the names of the individuals who authorized the suppression and the individuals who were paid to ensure the official investigation reached a predetermined conclusion." The audio kept going. Lucien could hear it from the warehouse floor, his father's steady, precise, unemotional voice laying out 22 years of structured corruption with the care of a man who had been building toward exactly this moment, except that the moment had arrived 8 years late, and to a different audience than he'd intended. On the warehouse floor, the sound of engagement had reduced. Osei's voice, curt. 2 down, 4 accounted for, 2 unknown. Then, 10 seconds later. 1. 1 unaccounted for. Lucien was at the office door when Grant Mercer came through the loading dock entrance. He had not been in the original 8. He had come separately from a different direction through the loading dock door that hadn't been used in years but was structurally functional. He was carrying a phone and a weapon and the particular expression of a man who had spent 4 years building a lie and has just watched it finish burning down and is not yet sure what that makes him now. He looked at Lucien in the doorway. He looked past Lucien at Elena in the office, visible through the glass partition, phone in hand, her father's voice playing in the room behind her. "It's already out," Lucien said. "Whatever you came here to stop. It's been out for 6 minutes." Grant's jaw moved. He looked at Elena again. She was looking back at him through the glass. Her face was the face of a woman who had spent 4 years inside a lie, and has just been given the precise dimensions of it. And what was in her expression was not grief and not fury, but something harder and more permanent than either. The look of someone who has finished with a thing completely and irrevocably and is waiting for the last procedural step before she can turn away from it forever. "Elena," Grant said. His voice had lost the controlled calibration she'd always known it by. It was just a man's voice now, rough at the edges, badly supported. "I want you to understand that it wasn't—" He stopped, started differently. "In the beginning, I didn't know about the fire. I didn't know what they'd done. I was already embedded before I understood what the network actually—" "Stop," Elena said through the glass. He stopped. "I don't want your accounting," she said. "I want you to hear this." She turned the phone's volume up. Her father's voice, clear and precise and recorded 8 years ago by a man who had known he was running out of time, filled the warehouse office and spilled out through the open door into the industrial space beyond. Grant Mercer stood in the cold of the loading dock entrance and listened to the voice of the man whose death he had been complicit in covering, and whatever was happening in his face was not something Lucien was interested in reading or cataloging. He was watching Grant's hands, the weapon in the right one, the phone in the left, the specific tension in the grip of both. "The transfer completed 2 minutes ago," Nikolai said in Lucien's ear. Federal contacts have the full archive. Mara is live. She's publishing in fragments. The first piece went up 4 minutes ago. It's already being picked up. A pause. Lucien, there are 2 federal vehicles moving toward this location. ETA 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Grant's grip on the weapon tightened. Don't, Lucien said. Quiet. No particular emphasis. The voice he used when the decision had already been made and was just waiting for the other person to catch up with it. Grant looked at him, then looked at Elena through the glass. She was not looking at Grant anymore. She was looking at the phone in her hand, listening to her father's voice with the full attention of someone receiving something that had been in transit for 8 years and has finally arrived. And the sound of that voice in the empty warehouse, steady and precise and completely unafraid, was the only thing in the room that mattered. Grant's hand moved, not the one with the weapon. The phone. He looked at the phone in his left hand, at the screen, at something on that screen. His face changed. Not dramatically, just a shift in the foundations of it, like a building settling. They cut the account, he said. His voice was stripped of everything now, just information, delivered to no one in particular. Voss just cut the account. The payments, the protections, He looked up. They're burning everything connected to the network, including everyone who worked with them, including Grant Mercer. Lucien looked at the man who had married Elena to keep her surveyable, who had walked her to a door in a snowstorm and locked it behind her, who had spent 4 years inside a constructed life with a function that had nothing to do with the person he'd been performing it beside. He looked at him for 1 second. "Put the weapon down, Grant," he said. "The federal vehicles are 8 minutes out, and you are going to want to be the first person talking when they arrive." Grant Mercer looked at the weapon in his hand as if he'd forgotten it was there. In the office behind Lucien, Elena made a sound that was not the sound of the recording and was not a word, and Dr. Solis moved immediately, and Lucien turned, and Elena had both hands on the table and was looking at the doctor with an expression that had finally, after everything, crossed the boundary from managed to urgent. "Now?" Lucien said. "Now," Dr. Solis said. The weapon clattered on the concrete behind him. He didn't look back. The baby came at 7:51 in the morning. Not in a hospital. Not in the clean-ordered space that Elena had planned for, with the birth plan she'd written in 3 drafts, and the bag packed by the closet door that she would never return to collect. She came in a warehouse office on the river-facing side of the district, on a folded moving blanket that Osei had found in a storage room, and Dr. Solis had assessed as functionally adequate, with the pragmatism of a woman who had delivered babies in conditions considerably worse. She came with the sound of federal vehicles pulling onto the Decker Road audible through the warehouse's high windows, and the thin gray light of a January morning coming through the glass, and her mother's voice, not crying, not calling out, just breathing, the same measured, deliberate breath that had carried them both through a blizzard and a bank vault and a warehouse floor and everything between. Dr. Solis said, "There she is." And Elena, who had not made a sound that could be called anything other than functional for the last 4 hours, made a sound then. Just one. Small and unguarded and involuntary, the sound of a person receiving something they had been afraid to fully believe in. Lucien stood in the office doorway with his back to the room, watching the warehouse floor where Osei and Dex were managing the arrival of the federal vehicles. And he heard that sound, and he did not turn around, because some moments are not meant to be witnessed by anyone who wasn't already inside them. Grant Mercer sat on the concrete floor of the warehouse's north bay, with his wrists zip-tied in front of him, and a federal agent he didn't know standing 6 feet away with the specific posture of someone who has been told to secure a subject and is doing exactly that and nothing more. Grant was not attempting anything. He had not attempted anything since the weapon had left his hand. He sat with his back against the shelving unit and his knees up and his eyes on the middle distance. And he was doing the thing that people do when the structure they've been operating inside for a long time has just collapsed entirely. He was recalculating. Not escape, not negotiation, just recalculating what the next 30 years of his life were going to look like, with the specific thoroughness of a man who had been a planner by nature and by profession and could not stop planning even when what he was planning for was his own ruin. The senior federal agent on scene was a woman named Hargrove, late 40s, with the face of someone who had spent a career being lied to by better liars than the ones currently in front of her, and had developed a settled immunity to it. She'd been briefed on the archive within minutes of Nikolai's transfer reaching the right inbox, had been in her vehicle before the briefing was complete, and had arrived at the Decker warehouse with a team and a set of questions that were going to require several weeks of answers, but whose first layer she intended to begin addressing immediately. She found Lucien Vescari standing in the center of the warehouse floor with the particular quality of stillness that distinguished men who had been in violent situations recently from men who had not. He had a cut above his left eye that he hadn't addressed. His coat was gone. He was watching the door to the office space with an attention that Hargrove assessed, in the first 3 seconds of looking at him, as something other than operational. "Mr. Vescari," she said. "Agent Hargrove." He turned to look at her with the directness of a man who had decided, at some point in the last few hours, to be done with indirection. "The woman in the office just delivered. She and the baby are stable. I need a medical transport." "Already called," Hargrove said. She looked at him. "I have questions." "I know," he said. "I'll answer them." "Not here. After she's in a hospital." Hargrove looked at the office, at the thin line of light under the door. She looked back at Lucien. She had read enough of the archive in the 12 minutes between receiving it and arriving at this location to understand the rough shape of what had happened over the last 22 years, and in that rough shape was the outline of the man in front of her. Not a clean figure, not a figure she could process without complication, but a figure who had, by whatever combination of instinct and self-interest in something she didn't have a clean category for, pulled a pregnant woman out of a snowstorm and then held a line for 72 hours against people with significantly more institutional power than he had. "After she's in a hospital," Hargrove said. "Thank you," Lucien said. The words came out without performance, which was the only way he knew how to mean them. Bombed. The medical transport arrived 11 minutes later. Dr. Solis had done everything that needed doing. The baby was wrapped in the cleanest material available, which was a thermal blanket from the vehicle kit, and was occupying the space on Elena's chest with the focused intensity of something that had been waiting a long time for exactly this position and intended to maintain it. She was small. She was pink in the specific way of people who have just arrived from somewhere else and are working out the terms of the new location. She had her mother's jaw, that particular determination in the set of it, visible already, before she'd been alive for 20 minutes. Elena looked at her and didn't look away. The paramedics came in with professional efficiency, and Elena let them do what they needed to do and didn't let go of the baby, and nobody asked her to. When they moved her onto the transport stretcher, she kept one hand free and flat on the baby's back, feeling the small rise and fall of breathing, real and warm and present, and the hand did not shake. Lucien came into the office when the paramedics stepped out to prepare the transport. The room was quieter now. Dr. Solis was repacking her kit in the corner with the methodical calm of someone processing the last several hours through the familiar ritual of her profession. Elena looked up at him. "She's breathing right," she said. "Solis says everything's right." "I know," Lucien said. "You heard." "Yes." Elena looked back at her daughter. "She doesn't have a name yet," she said. "I had a list. Grant and I, we were supposed to decide together." The sentence found its own irony, and Elena let it sit there without comment. "I'm going to need to make that decision alone." "Well, you've been making decisions alone for longer than you knew," Lucien said. Elena looked up at him again. It was not a sharp look. It was something more considered than that, the look of a person reassessing a statement to determine whether it was comfort or truth. She decided it was both, which made it neither simple to accept nor possible to refuse. "The envelope," she said. "My father's." "It's in your bag. Solis has it." "I want to read it before they take me." Lucien got the bag from Dr. Solis and brought it to the side of the stretcher and held it open for her. Elena reached in with her free hand, the one not on the baby's back, and found the envelope by touch. She held it for a moment without opening it. The paper was the kind her father had always used, heavy, cream-colored, the kind that lasted. His handwriting on the front was the same as it had always been, capital E, slightly larger than necessary. She opened it. The letter inside was 1 page, handwritten, dated the autumn before he died. She read it without reading it aloud, without sharing it, without any of the armor she'd been wearing for the last 72 hours. And Lucien stood at the side of the room and looked at the warehouse floor through the office window and gave her the room she needed to do that. When she finished, she folded it and put it back in the envelope and held the envelope against the baby's back alongside her hand, the paper warm within seconds from the baby's heat. "He knew," she said. Lucien waited. He knew someone would come eventually. He wrote to whoever found it first. He didn't know it would be me who opened the box. He just knew someone would. Her voice was steady but stripped of everything extra. He said, "If you're reading this, then the thing I was afraid of happened." He said, "I built this so it couldn't be buried." He said, "The people who built their power on what happened at that facility believed they could outlast the truth. I believe they cannot. Someone will carry this out. If that someone is my daughter, tell her I'm sorry she had to carry it, and tell her I always knew she was strong enough to." The room was quiet. Outside, the morning was arriving in full now, the thin January light becoming something more definite, the city's sounds assembling themselves into the ordinary noise of a day beginning. Somewhere in the city, Maravos's first published piece had already accumulated a number of reads that her editor would describe, in a call 2 hours from now, as unlike anything they'd seen in 11 years of digital publishing. Somewhere, the phones of 14 named individuals were beginning to ring with calls from attorneys who were themselves beginning to understand that the calls were already too late. "He would have wanted to meet her," Elena said. She looked at the baby. "She has his hands." She did. Lucien couldn't evaluate that with certainty from where he stood, but he took it on faith, because Elena Mercer had been right about enough things in the last 72 hours that he was disinclined to doubt her now. The paramedics came back. Elena let them take her. The hospital was called Mercy General, which Lucien noted without comment. Elena was admitted at 8:40 in the morning and was in a private room by 9:15, the kind of logistics that happened when the right calls were made in the right order, which Nikolai had handled from his workspace with the efficiency of someone who had just spent the most technically demanding night of his professional life and was running on the specific clarity that arrived on the far side of exhaustion. Lucien was not in the hospital. He was in a federal building on the east side of the district, in a conference room with Hargrove and 2 of her colleagues, answering questions with the patience of a man who has made a calculation about the value of full disclosure and has decided that the number comes out in favor of honesty. Not because of any instinct toward confession. Lucien Viscari had no particular history of voluntarism in that direction, but because the architecture of the next several months was going to require a foundation, and a foundation built on concealment. In the current evidentiary environment was not a foundation that would hold. He answered for 4 hours. He told them about the parking lot and the convoy and the GPS device. He told them about Ria and the key stamp and the bank. He told them about Marcus. He did not tell them everything about the nature of his own operations over the preceding 22 years, because there were questions Hargrove asked, and questions she didn't ask, and Lucien answered the ones she asked. When they were finished, Hargrove walked him to the building's front entrance. "You understand your situation is complicated," she said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of geography. "I've had a complicated situation for most of my adult life," Lucien said. "The archive is going to generate a significant amount of institutional attention over the next few months. Trials, investigations. People whose names appear in those documents are going to be looking for ways to reframe the narrative." She looked at him with the direct professional assessment she used for everything. "Your name appears in federal investigation files from 4 years ago. Closed files, inconclusive findings, but they exist." "I know," Lucien said. "The Delano case." "Yes." "Judge Harwick ruled on that case," Hargrove said, "who is now a named recipient in the archive's payment records." Lucien looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That changes the character of those closed files considerably," Hargrove said. "It suggests the conclusion was reached through means that weren't procedurally sound." "It suggests that," Lucien agreed. Hargrove held his gaze for a moment longer than the exchange required. You're going to hear from us again, she said. That's not a threat. It's just accurate. I know, Lucien said. I'll be available. She went back inside. He stood on the front steps in the January cold without his coat and looked at the city for a while. The sky had cleared overnight and was a hard, specific blue. The kind of winter blue that had nothing warm in it, but was beautiful anyway, in the way of things that don't offer comfort but offer clarity instead. He called Nikolai. How is she? He asked. Resting, Nikolai said. Baby's weight is good. All the markers are good. A pause. She asked about you. Lucien didn't say anything to that. Also, Nikolai said, Mafia Boss has called 3 times. The piece has been picked up by 6 national outlets. Andrew Voss was located at his home this morning by federal agents. He is currently in custody. Another pause. Senator Poole's office issued a statement at 10:30 calling the archive fabricated. His attorney retracted the statement 40 minutes later. And Harwick recused himself from the bench this morning. His clerk issued the notice. Nikolai's voice held the particular neutral quality he used when he was sitting with something large. It's happening, Lucien. The way Richard Calloway built it to happen. It's moving. Lucien stood on the steps for another moment. Then he went to find a cab. The hospital room was quiet when he arrived. Elena was sitting up in the bed with the baby in her arms, and the room had the particular quality of a space that has just hosted something enormous and is now settling around something small and permanent. There were no other visitors yet. Lucien had timed it, without consciously intending to, for the window between the medical staff's last round and the next. The light through the window was the afternoon kind, lower and warmer than morning, the January sun doing what it could. Elena looked at him when he came in. She looked tired in the way that went deeper than sleep, the bone-level tired of someone who has been running on will for 72 hours and has now been given permission to stop. But her eyes were clear. They told me about Voss, she said. Hargrove called. She's efficient, Lucien said. She told me about the Delano case, too. Elena watched him cross the room and take the chair beside the window. Not beside the bed, the window. The choice registered on her face. She told me Harwick's recusal changes the character of the closed investigation. She said it in the specific way people say things when they mean more than the words. She does that, Lucien said. She meant that you're not clear, Elena said, that what you did for me doesn't cancel what you've done otherwise. No, he said. It doesn't. Elena looked at him. Are you worried about it? He considered the question honestly, which was the only way he knew how to consider questions in the current room. No more than usual, he said. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. She almost smiled. It arrived and withdrew before it finished forming, but it had been there. He'd seen it. I named her, Elena said. She looked down at the baby. Clara. After nothing in particular, just because it sounded like something that had been waiting to be used. Clara, he said. Clara Ray. My grandmother's middle name. Elena shifted the baby slightly, adjusting the hold with the careful precision of someone who had been practicing it for 3 hours and was becoming competent. She's heavier than she looks. I'll take your word for it. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved through its afternoon, indifferent and continuous as cities do. Ria came to see me this morning, Elena said. Lucien's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. She came to apologize, Elena said. She sat in that chair for about 20 minutes. She told me the whole thing. The false authorization, the key stamp, all of it. She didn't ask for anything. She just told me, and then she left. Elena looked at him. She's not a bad person. No, Lucien said. She made a bad choice under conditions that were designed to produce exactly that choice. The people on that network were very good at that, Elena said. Finding the pressure point, finding what someone was afraid of losing and applying exactly enough weight. She paused. My father knew that. He wrote about it in the documents. He said, they don't break people with force. They break them with the threat of losing the thing that matters most, applied at the moment of maximum vulnerability. She looked at Clara. They found Grant when he was 26 and in debt and trying to build something, and they gave him a way out and a purpose and a salary, and 11 years later he had built a life so far inside their operation that there wasn't a self left underneath it that knew how to exist outside. That's a generous reading, Lucy Zien said. It's an accurate one, Elena said. It doesn't make it forgivable. It just makes it comprehensible. She was quiet for a moment. He's cooperating. Hargrove told me that too. He has incentive to. He has more than incentive, Elena said. I think he's afraid of them, genuinely. Whatever Andrew Voss told him when the account was cut, I think Grant understood in that moment that the thing protecting him had just become the thing hunting him, and the only thing between him and that is whatever deal he can make with federal prosecutors. She shifted Clara again. I don't forgive him. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that by the end, he wasn't operating from anything that looked like choice. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. You should sleep, he said. I know. She didn't move to sleep. You're going to leave soon. It wasn't a question, so he didn't treat it as one. I have things to handle, he said. The investigation. Among other things. How complicated is it going to get? He looked at the window. At the city in the afternoon light, ordinary and ongoing. I don't know yet, he said. Harwick's recusal reopens certain questions. Where those questions lead depends on people I can't fully predict. He looked back at her. I've managed complicated before. I know, Elena said. That's not what I'm asking. He held her gaze. I'm asking if you're going to be all right, she said, the way people ask that when they mean something more specific. The room was quiet. Clara made a small sound, not distress, just adjustment. The specific small sounds of a person learning that being alive involves a continuous series of minor recalibrations. Elena shifted her hold and the sound stopped. I don't know, Lucy Ian said. It came out with honesty that was not comfortable and was not dressed up in anything. There are things I've done that I can't make different by doing the right thing once. He paused. What I did for you was not a transaction. I want you to understand that. I didn't pull you out of that parking lot because I expected it to balance anything. I know, Elena said. I pulled you out because leaving you there wasn't something I was capable of, he said. That's all it was. Elena looked at him with the careful attention she'd been giving things since the beginning, not measuring exactly, just seeing. She had a quality of seeing that was different from most people's. It had probably been there before Grant and the 4 years and the deliberate dismantling, but those years had sharpened it into something precise and unsentimental. She saw things as they actually were, and she let what she saw be what it was without requiring it to be something more comfortable. You should go handle your things, she said. He stood. Nikolai will check in, he said. If you need anything. Lucien. He stopped. Thank you, she said. Just that. No architecture around it, no qualification. The same way he'd thanked Hargrove on the steps, direct and without performance. He nodded once. He moved to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame because there was something left to say that he hadn't said, and leaving without saying it felt like a specific kind of failure. Your father was right, he said without turning around. About you. He left before she could answer. Chacun. The weeks that followed moved at 2 different speeds simultaneously. The public speed was fast. Arrests, hearings, the cascade of institutional response that happens when a well-documented archive reaches enough people with enough authority that the weight of it becomes impossible to redirect. Andrew Voss was indicted on 14 counts within the first week. Senator Poole resigned on day 9, ahead of the formal inquiry that would have made resignation the charitable interpretation of his options. Judge Alan Harwick's recusal became a formal investigation that expanded within 3 weeks to include 6 other Eighth Circuit rulings, a process that legal analysts described, in the measured language of people trying not to use the word catastrophic, as having significant implications for a significant number of concluded cases. The 7 people who had died in the facility fire 22 years ago had families. Most of those families had believed for 2 decades that an accident had taken someone from them. The correction of that belief, the formal acknowledgement, the documentation, the record being set straight, did not give anyone back what they had lost. But it gave them a name to attach to the loss. It gave them something to do with the anger that had been sitting without an address for 22 years. That mattered. Elena knew it mattered because her father's files said it mattered, said it with the conviction of a man who had understood that the truth was not sufficient by itself, but was the necessary precondition for everything else. Mara Voss's publication won an award for the coverage. Mara called Elena to tell her, and Elena listened and said something appropriate, and after the call she sat in the kitchen of the apartment she'd leased on the east side of the city. A new apartment, new address, nothing left over from the Renlow Drive years except the leather bag and the key ring, which now held only keys to doors she had chosen herself, and held Clara against her shoulder and listened to the baby breathe. The private speed was slower. It had the pace of things that required something more than action. It had the pace of a woman sitting with a one-page letter from her father until she had read it enough times that the words had moved from the page into somewhere more permanent. It had the pace of going back to that letter on a Thursday morning in February and finding a line she'd read 15 times that suddenly meant something different than it had meant all the previous times. Not because the line had changed, but because she had moved into a position where she could receive it fully. The line was near the end. It said, "The archive is not what I'm leaving you. The archive is what I'm leaving the world. What I'm leaving you is simpler. The knowledge that you come from someone who believed the truth was worth the cost of finding it. Everything else is yours to build." She had the letter framed, not displayed, framed and placed face down in the drawer of her bedside table, available but not on show, in the private place where things that matter most are kept. Ria came twice. The first time was the apology, the 20 minutes in the hospital chair. The second time was 6 weeks later, when Elena called her because she needed someone who understood the technical architecture of what her father had built, and Ria was the person she trusted most to understand it. They sat at Elena's kitchen table for 3 hours and went through the archive systematically, and by the end of it they had identified 2 additional threads that Nikolai hadn't flagged in the initial processing. Smaller, older, connecting the Casterly-Ross network to 2 regulatory decisions in an adjacent industry that would generate a separate federal inquiry when the information was forwarded. It was, Elena thought, the kind of work her father would have recognized, methodical, patient, following the logic of a thing until the logic ran out. Ria came a 3rd time after that, and a 4th, and at some point it stopped being a visit and started being a working arrangement that neither of them formally named. Grant Mercer's cooperation agreement was finalized in February. The terms were not made public. Elena was not party to the negotiation and did not seek to be. She received a single communication from Grant's attorney, a formal document regarding the dissolution of their marriage, accompanied by a letter from Grant himself that she read once and then put in a different drawer from her father's letter, the one she didn't open again. She signed the dissolution papers on a Tuesday morning with Clara on her lap, which was not the most efficient way to sign legal documents, but was the way things happened when you were doing everything alone and had decided that alone was not the same as insufficient. The estate that had been Lucien Vescari's, the one with the walled courtyard and the high coffered ceilings, and the east wing where Elena had spent her first conscious hours after the parking lot, began a quiet organizational transition in March. The nature of the transition was not publicly reported, but Nikolai, who had moved into a different professional arrangement and had become the kind of person who tracked certain things as a matter of professional habit, noted that several of the properties and accounts associated with the organization's operational structure were being transferred, closed, or restructured in ways consistent with a significant reduction in scope. He mentioned this to Elena on a Thursday call. "Is he all right?" Elena asked. "As far as I can tell," Nikolai said. "The federal inquiry opened 2 threads relating to the Delano case. The Harwick recusal complicates them, but doesn't resolve them. He has attorneys." A pause. "He's been quiet." Elena looked out the window of her East Side apartment at the street below, where March was making its case against February's persistence. Crocuses in the planting strip, the particular mud that came from snow finally releasing its claim on the ground. Clara was in the other room, making the sound she made when she was awake, and had decided the current arrangement of her immediate world was not adequate. "Tell him Clara said hello," Elena said. Nikolai was quiet for a moment. I know he doesn't check in," Elena said. "Tell him anyway." He came in April. No advance notice. No call. Just a knock on the door of the East Side apartment on a Tuesday afternoon when the windows were open for the first time that season and the air coming through smelled like the river and the beginning of things. Elena opened the door. Lucien stood in the hallway in a different coat than the one she'd known him in. Lighter, the coat of a man who had set something heavy down and was trying out what it felt like to move without it. He looked the same in the structural sense and different in every other way. The way people look when they've gone through something that rearranged what was underneath their face. Clara said hello, he said. She did, Elena said, through Nikolai. I know. A pause. I thought I should return it in person. She stepped back from the door. He came in. The apartment was the apartment of a woman who had been building something from the beginning, not decorated exactly, but assembled with intention. Books that she'd chosen. A plant on the windowsill that was thriving. A drawing on the refrigerator that was Clara's first notable production. A smear of red and yellow that the parenting literature called developmentally advanced for the age, and that Elena called unmistakably her daughter's. Clara was on the floor of the living room with a collection of objects that she was assessing with the systematic attention of someone conducting a serious study. She was 4 months old and already had opinions about the world that she communicated with considerable clarity. Lucien crouched down and looked at her. Clara looked back at him with the unhurried assessment of a person who had no reason to perform anything for anyone and therefore didn't. She has your jaw, he said. I know, Elena said. And his hands. Looked at the hands. Small, curled around the edge of a plastic ring that was not what the ring had been intended for, but was what Clara had decided it was. He stayed crouched for a moment, looking at her with the same quality of attention Elena had watched him give to every room he'd been in, careful, specific, taking in what was actually there rather than what he expected to find. He stood. The inquiry, Elena said, not asking about it, just naming it, placing it in the room where they could both see it. Moving slowly, he said. The Harwick connection reopened 2 cases. Whether they get where the prosecutors want them to go depends on things I can't control. He said it without bitterness, which was the thing she'd noticed about him from the beginning. The absence of bitterness, even when there was substantial material for it. I've been reducing, he said. Nikolai told me. It was already time, Lucien said. The last few years, it had become something I was maintaining out of habit rather than building toward anything. When there was something to protect, the habit lost its justification. He looked at the window, at the open window and the April air coming through. I kept the Decker warehouse. Elena looked at him. I thought, he said, that a warehouse on the river was probably the wrong place to keep something that had come through what it came through. So I had the office space built out. Floor, walls, proper lighting. He paused. It's a room now. That's all it is. A room where certain things happened and the walls remember. And whoever uses it next doesn't need to know the walls remember. They just get a room. Elena thought about her father's letter. The archive is not what I'm leaving you. What I'm leaving you is simpler. There was another inquiry into the facility fire, she said, separate from the Voss prosecution. The families of the 7 workers, one of them has filed a civil suit against the remaining Casterly Ross assets. Ria is helping me document the chain for them. I know, Lucien said. I read Mara's piece on it. It's going to take years, Elena said. The civil process, even with the archive, even with everything documented, it takes years. Your father knew that, Lucien said. He knew it, Elena said. He built the archive so it would outlast the process. She looked at Clara on the floor, who had moved from the plastic ring to a soft block and was conducting a comparative analysis. I've been thinking about what I'm going to do, professionally. When Clara's old enough that I can... She stopped. Restarted. My father's firm doesn't exist anymore. His partners are both retired, but there's a framework in the archive, the methodology he used to build the case, cross-referencing payment structures with regulatory decisions, tracing the financial layer underneath the official record. She looked at Lucien. It's replicable. There are other networks like the one Voss ran, smaller, maybe, differently constructed, but the same fundamental architecture, power using money to insulate itself from the consequences of what it does. Lucienne looked at her. I'm going to need people who understand certain kinds of systems, she said. Financial structures, technical infrastructure, people who know how to find things that are meant not to be found. You're describing a significant undertaking, he said. My father spent 12 years on one case, Elena said. I'm not in a hurry. The afternoon light moved through the open window and lay across the floor where Clara sat, warm and specific, the kind of light that only came in April, when the year had finally finished arguing with winter. Lucian stood in it without moving, and Elena watched him stand in it, and Clara looked up from her comparative analysis and looked at the man standing in the light with the same unhurried assessment she'd given him before. Nikolai's employment arrangement is currently flexible, Lucian said. I know, Elena said. Ria's skills are relevant to what you're describing. I know that too, Elena said. He looked at her. You've already thought about this. For about 6 weeks, she said. I was waiting to see if you'd come back before I said it out loud. The thing that almost became a smile, the one she'd first seen in the guest room of the estate, the one that arrived and withdrew before completing itself. Finally, in the light of an April afternoon in an East Side apartment with an open window and a 4-month-old conducting a study on the floor, arrived and stayed. What do you need? He asked. Elena picked Clara up from the floor. The baby settled against her shoulder with the confidence of someone who has learned that certain places are reliable. She looked at Lucienne over the top of Clara's head, and what was in her face was not the face from the parking lot or the bank or the warehouse, not the face of a woman surviving. It was the face of a woman who had come through something at a cost she would continue paying in small ways for years, and had arrived somewhere that had not existed before she built it. I need a room, she said, and people who know how to look. Outside the window, the city moved through its April afternoon, and the river caught the light, and somewhere in 7 encrypted locations, a dead man's archive continued to be read by people who were going to spend the next several years determining what it cost to build something on a lie and who had to pay for it in the end. The answer, as it always is, was complicated. The answer was many people, in many ways, across a long time. But the accounting had begun, and the woman who had carried the key for 8 years without knowing it was a key had set it down at last, and what she was picking up instead was heavier and more permanent and entirely her own. Clara pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and breathed. Elena put one hand on the baby's back. Outside, the April light held everything it could.